The tunnels don't sleep. They keep the echoes, the footsteps, the cries that never reach daylight. Subway workers and late-night passengers see what you're not meant to. Shadows between trains, whispers under the tracks. And sometimes, they don't make it back to the surface. These are the most disturbing true subway horror stories, buried in concrete, etched into steel, and told in hushed voices for a reason. Listen close. Never stare too long into the dark between stations. It was past midnight when I stepped onto the platform, though the clock above claimed it was still early evening. That detail was the first thorn in my chest, a small snag I tried to ignore. The air smelled metallic, too clean for a station that should have been filled with bodies and sweat and perfume. Every bench sat hollow, vending machines hummed without customers, and the walls echoed like a throat waiting to speak. My footsteps were louder than I expected, so loud they seemed to belong to someone else, following a half-second behind. The train slid in without a sound. No brakes, no screech of metal against metal, no rush of displaced air. Just a silent arrival, doors yawning open like the breath of something ancient. I hesitated, the way animals hesitate before stepping into a clearing. But hesitation bends under habit. I wanted home, warmth, and the lie of familiarity. So I stepped inside. The lights flared once, buzzing, then steadied. But the steady felt wrong. Too sharp, too white, casting no shadow where my legs should have thrown one. The seats were upholstered in a pattern I did not know, a stitched geometry that shifted when I glanced away. A line of windows stretched in both directions, but the glass was dark, not reflective. It was absence, like staring into a hole drilled into the world. I moved down the aisle, hearing the soft hum of machinery that did not exist, the faint tick of metal joints that did not belong to the train. It was less like a ride and more like stepping into a throat, swallowed whole by steel ribs and electric veins. When the doors sealed, the sound was final. A lid shut on a jar. The air inside tasted heavier, as though each breath required permission. The speaker above my head crackled, but released no words, only a static sigh that rose and fell like something sleeping. The floor trembled beneath my boots, and the car slid forward into darkness so thick it seemed to bend around the windows. No stations, no lights, no graffiti-marked walls rushing past. Just tunnel, endless, uninterrupted tunnel, deeper and deeper. And then the flicker came, a heartbeat of blackout, the bulbs stuttering like eyes fighting sleep. In that brief blink, I saw them. Rows of passengers, every seat filled, faces pressed to the glass, with mouths open but soundless, eyes locked on me. When the light steadied, the seats were empty again. My breath snagged in my throat, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the hum. I sat slowly, gripping the edge of the seat, pretending calm, but already I knew. This was not the usual route, and I had no idea where the end of the line would be. The train roared on, the rhythm beneath my feet uneven, as if the tracks were laid hastily, stitched together by something that cared little for precision. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, but the pull of the windows was too strong. Each glance revealed faces nearer than before, their features pressed so hard into the glass that skin seemed ready to tear. Their eyes followed me. I tested it, stepping down the aisle, and their heads turned with me, slow and perfect, a choir of silent watchers. My breath hitched when one face twitched, a jaw jerking as though trying to break free. The overhead speaker crackled alive, static bleeding into words I could not understand. It was a voice, too low and wet, stretched thin like tape left too long in the sun. The syllables dragged, guttural and desperate. And yet, I knew it was speaking to me. I clutched the pole beside my seat, staring at the rust spreading in veins along the chrome, and felt my stomach lurch as the faces began to mouth those same warped sounds. Their lips did not sync, but their intentions were clear. They were answering. A ripple moved across the glass, like a stone dropped into a pond. For an instant, the wall was liquid, the pale faces pushing forward with more urgency. I reached out without thinking, drawn to it, my palm hovering just above the pane. The warmth was stronger this time, almost feverish, and it beat against the glass in rhythm with my heart. The heat spread into my chest, my pulse stumbling to match it. My reflection hovered faintly between them, warped and stretched, but it was smiling when I was not. I backed away, pulse hammering, eyes darting to the far end of the car. A door separated me from the next carriage, its tiny window dark and unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw someone move behind it, a flicker of shape, taller than any person should be. The speaker crackled again, louder, the words snapping sharp now, fragments of commands spilling through. My name, over and over, mangled but recognizable, called in a dozen overlapping voices. The lights guttered, plunging the car into rolling darkness. In each flash of stuttering glow, the faces were closer, filling the glass completely, mouths stretched wider, black holes swallowing every feature. On the final flicker, they weren't behind the windows anymore. They were pressed against the seats opposite me, pale and grinning, though no sound escaped their gaping throats. When the light steadied, they were gone, but the air still shook with the echo of screams too deep for ears to hear. The speaker above me sputtered again, a low hiss swelling into shape. At first I thought it was static, but then it bent into something like words, only stretched too far, vowels pulled thin until they broke. Promises whispered of arrival, but the station's name never came. It was like being told I was heading toward home, but never being allowed to know where that home was. The sound slithered into my ears, too wet, too hungry, until my own tongue felt heavy, as if it wanted to mimic the voice. The stench arrived with it, rust, sharp and metallic, mixing with the damp tang of iron, as though the car itself bled from every seam. My throat itched with the taste, metallic flecks catching in my teeth. I turned to the window, desperate for something familiar, but the reflection staring back was wrong. My body moved, but my double did not. It lingered 1 second too long, smiled with lips I never curved, and tilted its head in a way that split me from myself. And then I saw them. At first, just a shimmer behind me, like smoke coiling in the glass. But the haze thickened until shadows filled every seat. Rows of passengers seated neat and still, all staring forward with faces too blurred to know. They were not in the car. I looked back and the seats were bare, dust glinting faintly under the lights. Yet in the window, each place was taken. Their mouths moved together, silent, perfectly timed, like puppets taught a single word. Over and over, their jaws clicked open and closed, forming syllables I could not hear but felt along my skin, shivering through pores and veins. I pressed my hand to the glass. My reflection pressed too, but its smile deepened, teeth glinting sharp, while the shadows only mouthed faster, lips stretching too wide. The lights faltered. Just once. Long enough for me to see that, in the reflection, I was no longer sitting where I thought. My double was, eyes too bright, grin fixed. And I was among the shadow passengers, my own mouth opening and closing in their rhythm, silently chanting the word I could not yet hear but already knew. The door at the far end of the carriage rattled, though no stop had come. Metal scraped against metal, hinges whining as though they had not been used in years. I froze, every nerve tight, as the conductor stepped through. His stride was steady, precise, polished shoes clicking against the trembling floor. The brim of his hat cast his face in shadow, the uniform neat and pressed, an echo from another time. For a breath, I almost felt relief. But when he turned, the truth hollowed me out. His eyes were gone. Only sockets remained, dark hollows that seemed to drink the light around them. Empty, but not lifeless. Inside, faint movement shimmered, like smoke curling from a dying fire. He raised a gloved hand toward me, palm open, patient. My pocket was bare. I had no ticket. His silence pressed heavier than a demand, heavier than words could carry. I tried to speak, but my throat caught. His hand lingered in the air until finally it dropped, brushing against mine. The chill was immediate, a sharp plunge into ice. His skin felt fragile, brittle, snapping faintly as though wrapped too thin over bone. A sound like dry twigs breaking came with his touch, and I pulled back, bile rising in my throat. The car lurched violently then, wheels screeching against tracks unseen. Lights shattered overhead in a storm of sparks, plunging everything into suffocating black. For a moment, I was blind, but he remained visible, his outline glowing faintly, edges smoldering like coal ash long after a fire has died. He did not move, yet his presence pressed closer, suffocating, undeniable. In the dark, the faces in the windows pulsed brighter, mouths stretched open in silent screams. The shadows in the glass writhed, pulling at each other as if clawing to get through. And the conductor's hollow sockets turned toward me, glowing faintly from within, promising that the journey was nowhere near its end. The train plunged forward, faster than it had any right to, a weightless rush that pressed me into the seat until my ribs ached. Darkness swallowed everything beyond the windows, not the kind broken by station lights or glimmers of distant tunnels, but a black that seemed alive, pulling us deeper with every breath I took. My hands searched the doors, desperate for a release, but the locks had fused, metal groaning as though it had been welded shut from the other side. Moisture bloomed on the glass, a sheen of condensation spreading in strange patterns. At first, it looked like streaks from my own breath, until letters began to form, curling into the unmistakable shape of my name. Each pane whispered it differently, some neat, some jagged, as though written by countless hands I could not see. I wiped at it with my sleeve, but the letters returned, sharper, etched in fog that was not mine. The faces pressed closer now, no longer faint. Their features sharpened, cheekbones jutting, eyes swollen and bright with hunger. They smeared against the glass, lips stretching, teeth rattling faintly, though no sound escaped. It was as if they had been waiting for this moment, as if the speed in the dark had loosened whatever thin barrier held them back. My own reflection flickered between them, smiling, as if inviting the trade. I tried to scream, tried to force sound past the knot in my throat, but nothing came. My mouth opened wide, my lungs burned, yet silence claimed me, as though even my voice had been stolen by the train. The speaker above my head sparked to life one final time. The voice that emerged was warped and broken, but its words were clear, each syllable dragged like nails down steel. End of the line. The lights in the car dimmed to a dying glow. The conductor's faint outline still lingered at the far end, coal ash smoldering, watching. The faces in the glass beat harder, pressing, warping the panes inward as though one more breath would shatter them and set them free. I gripped the rail, waiting for the inevitable crash. but there was no impact, no stop, no escape. The doors would never open again. The journey had become the destination. And I knew, with a certainty that hollowed me out, I would ride forever. Every late shift blurred into the same tired routine. The fluorescent hum, the hollow echo of my footsteps, the stale smell of dust and oil. But always, without fail, he was there. A man in a trench coat stained with years of rain and grime, hunched on the far bench. His head stayed bowed, as if sleep had claimed him. But I knew he never slept. His eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, tracked me without moving. I could feel them pricking the back of my neck, sharp as pins pressed into skin. No train ever took him. I watched countless doors open and close, crowds spilling out and vanishing into the night. Yet he remained. A figure anchored to that bench, unmoving, untouched by time. Even when the wind shifted and trash skittered across the tiles, even when the announcements called last boarding, he did not stir. The stillness of him was worse than any movement. It was not patience. It was waiting. I told myself he was harmless. A drifter, maybe. A man who had nowhere else to go. I tried to invent a story for him, something human to lessen the unease. But each excuse failed the longer I saw him there. The platform became his domain, and I was trespassing. His silence carried weight, the kind that bent the air until I could hardly breathe. Nights blurred together, exhaustion gnawing at me, but his presence stayed sharp. If I lingered too long near the stairs, I felt the itch between my shoulders, the heat of his gaze dragging me closer to the tracks. Once, I caught myself whispering aloud, "What do you want?" My voice cracked against the tiles, pathetic and small. He did not answer, did not move, but the brim of his hat tilted just enough for the corner of his mouth to show, curling slightly, like a smile carved too deep. From that night on, I stopped pretending. He was not there by accident. He was not passing time. The trains might come and go. The city might pulse above us. But the man in the trench coat waited for me. He always had. And I knew, with a certainty that hollowed my bones, that one night soon, I would not leave the platform without him. That night I moved faster than usual, eager to escape the stale air of the station and the weight of his presence. The train screeched into place, doors hissing open, and I forced myself not to look at him again. But I did. The bench was empty. For the first time since I had begun noticing him, the man was gone. A wave of relief crashed through me, so sudden I nearly laughed. Maybe he had finally left, or maybe I had imagined him all along. I sank into a seat and let myself believe it. The doors closed with a final sigh, the car rattling as the train jerked into motion. The lights dimmed in rhythm with the tunnels passing outside. I turned toward the window, expecting only the blurred reflection of myself, tired and hollow-eyed. Instead, the glass betrayed me. Behind me, in the reflection, sat the man. His trench coat was darker here, soaking the light, his face clearer than I had ever seen on the platform. Lips pulled back just enough to reveal a grin, stretched and deliberate. My stomach twisted. I snapped my head around, scanning the car. Empty seats, shadows stretching across the floor. No one there. The only sound was the rattle of the train, carrying me deeper into the night. But when I turned back to the window, he had not vanished. He remained seated behind me, his grin wider now, his teeth far too many for a human mouth. His eyes, sunken yet piercing, locked to mine, unblinking. I tested him, lifting my hand slowly, trembling fingers brushing my temple. In the reflection, his hand rose too, but not to his own face, to mine. His fingers reached toward my reflection's cheek, stroking it, though I felt nothing in the real world. The sight of it curdled something deep in me. My body wanted to move, to flee to the farthest corner of the car, but I was trapped between believing what I saw and denying it. The train roared on, plunging into a stretch of tunnel so dark the lights inside flickered. When they steadied again, the reflection leaned closer, his grin splitting wider until it nearly tore his face in two. My reflection sat still, paralyzed, while his eyes devoured me. I turned, desperate to see nothing but empty seats, but dread had already settled in me like a sickness. I knew the man had finally left the bench because he had found his way inside. He did not vanish when I willed him to. The reflection clung to the glass, steady, deliberate, as though it had been waiting for me to notice it all along. My body moved with the rhythm of the train, swaying as steel screamed beneath us, but his chest rose and fell on its own, too slow, too heavy, drawing in a breath I had not taken. It was like watching someone else live inside my skin, wearing me like an abandoned coat. His lips moved, shaping words I could not hear. They were deliberate, formed with care, syllables mouthed like secrets. I leaned closer, straining to read them, but the more I tried, the more they blurred, until his mouth opened wide enough for the fog to pour out. The window misted over from his breath, white and heavy, though the air around me was still and dry. My hand lifted, trembling. Against reason, against every desperate thought screaming not to, I pressed my palm flat against the glass. The cold seared my skin, but then warmth spread through it, his warmth. His hand met mine from the other side, the skin gray, stretched tight across joints bent wrong, the fingers curled as though bones had been snapped and reset too many times. Where our palms aligned, the glass flexed, a ripple quivering outward like water under pressure. I tried to pull away, but his hand flattened harder, forcing mine to stay. His eyes gleamed, locked onto mine, black pupils swallowing every light in the car. My pulse throbbed violently in my ears, drowning out the train, drowning out everything but the sickening rhythm of my heart fighting itself. The longer I looked, the more the reflection no longer seemed trapped. He leaned into me, pressing forward until I felt the weight of his body in the glass. I turned sharply, desperate to see the car behind me empty, desperate for proof that none of this was real. And it was empty. Seats bare, shadows stretching thin. But in the window, he sat there still, his grin widening as though my fear was exactly what he had been waiting for. The air grew dense, heavy, suffocating. I was not alone in that car. I never had been. I forced myself closer, rage and terror tangled into something reckless. If he was only glass, then glass could break. My reflection sat there grinning, shoulders hunched, head cocked too far to the side, eyes wide with a hunger I could not name. "Stop it," I whispered, voice shaking, but the grin only stretched. Skin pulled thin across his cheeks until it split into cracks. And then the window itself began to fracture, hairline lines crawling outward like veins. The shards trembled as though straining to contain him. Each crack widened with the sound of teeth grinding, pressing outward as if the body inside the glass had been packed too tightly, aching for release. His hand flattened against mine again, harder this time, the pressure bowing the surface. The reflection's shoulders heaved, his chest swelling with a breath he did not need. My own lungs burned, breath locking in my throat. Then the lights gave out. One after another, they sputtered and died, plunging the car into a suffocating void. The only glow remained in the window, the pale shimmer of his body pressing forward. It lit the aisle faintly, shadows twisting against the seats, stretching in directions they should not go. I felt him in my spine, a pull like a tether, as if an invisible rope had been knotted deep into my bones. I staggered back, but the pull came with me, yanking harder the farther I tried to move. It was not the window keeping him in. It was me. The reflection leaned forward, grin splitting so wide it carved into his cheeks, teeth gleaming too sharp, too many. His head tilted back, throat working as if he were swallowing me whole through the glass. My knees buckled, my body pitched toward him, dragged by something I could not fight. I clawed at the seat, nails tearing fabric, but the pull only grew stronger. My reflection's arms opened in welcome, ready to embrace, eager to consume. And as the glass began to buckle outward, bending, rippling like water about to burst, I realized it was not just trying to drag me in. It was trying to take my place. The screech of metal tore through the dark, so sudden it felt like the train itself was being ripped apart. The car jolted, sparks raining in the black, and then, with a violent lurch, it slowed. I stopped. My body moved before my mind did, desperate for escape, stumbling down the aisle as the doors yawned open with a hiss that reeked of burning wires. I spilled onto the platform, chest heaving, heart pounding so hard it felt as though my ribs would crack from within. For a moment, I let myself believe I was safe. Then I saw him. The man in the trench coat stood only a few feet away, exactly where the shadows broke into pale fluorescent light. His coat dripped, though no rain had fallen that night, and the drops hissed as they hit the floor, leaving dark stains that bled outward like ink. His head was no longer bowed. His face turned toward me, and I wished it had not. His eyes were pits, hollow craters carved too deep, darker than the tunnels themselves. When he lifted his gaze, I felt the weight of falling into them, as though he had dug graves behind my eyes and claimed me. The platform bustled, alive with weary commuters brushing past me, their bags swinging, their conversations low and dull. None of them noticed him. They walked straight by, shoulders nearly colliding, and not one person flinched. Their blindness was worse than his stare. I wanted to scream, to claw at them, to beg someone to see him, but my voice froze against my teeth. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, the sound of his shoe against tile sharp enough to pierce the hum of the crowd. Another step, closer still, the stench of mildew and rot rolling off his coat. I stumbled back, nearly colliding with a stranger who glared but kept moving, oblivious. The man's grin had returned, wide and wet, stretching too far across his pale face. He raised a hand, and the air thickened as though it wanted to bind me to him. I ran. My legs carried me up the stairs 2 at a time, lungs burning, fear digging claws into my back. But behind me, faint and measured, came the sound of his footsteps. Not rushed, not frantic, steady, endless, certain. And I knew, as the station doors burst open to the night above, that his steps would never stop. Not until I was his. They told me the service tunnel would shave 10 minutes off my walk, but the moment I slipped past the rusted gate, I regretted it. The air was stagnant, heavy with dust and mold, every breath sticking to the back of my throat. Tiles lined the narrow passage, gleaming faintly under fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered like nervous insects. Each step I took came back to me in sharp echoes. But the sound wasn't right. It didn't bounce like stone and air should. It rolled, low and hollow, like it was slipping down the throat of something alive. I pushed forward, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest, telling myself it was just another shortcut, just another forgotten artery under the city. But halfway through, the sound shifted. It wasn't the rumble of trains, not the rush of air pushed along the line. This was something else, something layered and raw. It rose from the walls themselves, faint at first, then stronger. A chorus of voices, hundreds of them, tangled together. They cried out not in words, but in pure anguish, a tide of grief that rippled through the passage. I stopped, frozen, pulse quickening. My ears strained against the echo, trying to make sense of it, trying to separate one voice from the mass. For a second, I swore I heard a child sob, then an old woman's wail, then screams so sharp they cut straight through the bone. The sound pressed closer, seeping into my skin, wrapping around me until I couldn't tell if it was in the tunnel or in my own head. My hand lifted on its own, pressed against the grout between the tiles. The vibration was unmistakable, a steady thrum like breath moving behind stone. It pulsed in rhythm, inhaling, exhaling, as though the walls themselves were lungs working overtime, straining under the weight of centuries of suffering. The moment my palm touched it, the cry spiked, louder, closer, and somewhere beneath the hundreds of voices, I heard one whisper my name. My stomach lurched, a cold weight settling in me. This wasn't just an echo. This was something alive, something buried here long before the trains ever came. The tunnel was not empty. It was listening, and it wanted me to keep walking. The air collapsed into cold so sudden it felt like I had stepped into another season. My breath puffed out in pale clouds, hanging in the corridor like it was reluctant to vanish, twisting into shapes too human to be chance. The voices rose sharper now, breaking from a mournful chorus into something articulate, syllables chiseled raw. They scraped at the tiles, at my bones, until I caught it clear. My name, dragged long, warped but mine. Each time they spoke it, my stomach clenched tighter, as if my body recognized the sound even before my mind did. Moisture gathered on the walls, glittering in the weak fluorescent light. But it disobeyed gravity. The drops slid upward, streaking toward the ceiling, defying every natural law. The sight hollowed me, made me feel wrong in my own skin, like I had wandered into a place where the rules that governed breath and blood did not belong. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers, desperate for some light stronger than these flickering tubes. Some warmth to prove I hadn't fallen completely outside the world. The screen glowed a sickly dim yellow before sputtering and dying in my hand. Heat fled with it, like the device had stolen the last ember I carried. My chest tightened as if the cold were alive, seeping into my lungs, clinging to my ribs. I stuffed the phone back into my pocket, hands shaking hard enough to rattle the zipper. The tunnel no longer felt like stone and tile. It felt like a throat closing, swallowing me inch by inch. I turned to retreat, heart pounding, but the way back was gone. The corridor had collapsed into black, short and absolute, as though the light itself had been swallowed whole. Panic surged hot, but ahead of me, the fluorescence flickered in a rhythm, deliberate, not random. On, off, on, off. Pauses woven into a pattern that clawed at something deep in my memory. I stared at the stuttering glow, the rhythm scratching at the edges of recognition. It was a code, one I almost remembered. Something I had learned as a child and forgotten. Something meant for emergencies. My throat dried, dread thickening. Because whatever tapped that pattern was not trying to help me. It was calling me forward, luring me deeper, spelling out a welcome in a language I thought only I should have known. I tried to steady my breathing, whispering excuses into the stale air. Just old pipes, I told myself. just metal groaning in the cold, air currents dragging sound through forgotten vents. But the lie curdled on my tongue. The voices were no longer abstract, no longer a distant hum. They had weight now, edges, identities. I couldn't see them, but I felt them. The way you can feel eyes locked on your back in an empty room. The air prickled against my skin, each breath carrying the invisible pressure of stairs pressing closer. A damp chill slid across the nape of my neck, clammy and deliberate, like the fingers of something pulled fresh from a flooded cellar. My shoulders tightened, head whipping back, but nothing waited in the shadows. The tunnel stretched empty behind me, yet the sensation remained. The certainty of unseen hands hovering just out of reach. I hugged myself, pulse quickening, my body screaming to flee while my legs refused to move. Beneath my boots, the tiles began to tremble. Not the shiver of trains far away, not the mechanical rattle of steel and stone. This was slower, heavier, pulsing in rhythm like the dull thud of a living heart. The ground beneath me beat against my soles as though the tunnel itself was alive, feeding its lifeblood through the walls. Each vibration climbed higher through my bones, lodging in my chest, sinking with the frantic hammer of my own heart until I couldn't tell which one belonged to me. Then the maintenance door on my left shuddered. The frame rattled as though something pressed from the other side. Once, twice. A dull thump of fists or bodies, muffled but urgent. The hinges groaned, strained. I staggered back, breath caught in my throat, waiting for the door to burst open. But it didn't. It only bulged outward, swelling with the pressure of something desperate to escape. Then stilled. Silence fell sharp, so sudden it hurt. And then, through the small brass keyhole, something exhaled. The breath was moist, sour, brushing my cheek like the sigh of a long-buried grave. The word it carried was almost kind, almost coaxing, spoken in a voice too soft to resist. Come closer. The syllables clung to me, sticky and warm, as though they had already decided I would obey. I bolted, lungs tearing for air that grew thinner with every step. The tunnel seemed to sense my panic, twisting against me, narrowing until the tiled walls curved inward like rows of teeth about to snap shut. Each fluorescent above me popped and died as I passed, plunging the space behind into complete black. The sound of crying chased me. No longer the chorus of countless voices, but one solitary wail. It rose and broke with every stride, high and raw. And when I finally recognized it, the marrow in my bones turned to ice. It was my voice. The cries pleaded in tones that matched my own, words blurring but unmistakable in intent. Help me, it sobbed, over and over. A mirror begging itself, a reflection calling out from the dark. My pace faltered. It wasn't possible, but the echo bled with the exact break in my voice, the same cracks, the same rhythm. It was me, pleading with myself from somewhere just ahead, somewhere I could never quite reach. The floor betrayed me. My foot snagged on a lip of raised grout, sending me sprawling. My cheeks smacked against the cold tile, the taste of dust and copper exploding in my mouth. I lay there, stunned, hair falling into my eyes. The crying didn't stop. It only grew clearer, each sob now stitched into syllables that drew out my name, hollow and desperate, as though I were abandoning someone I loved. Through the strands of my hair, I saw them. Damp footprints bloomed on the tiles just ahead, the water dark against the pale grout. They were small, impossibly small, the kind a child might leave running barefoot after a bath. But these didn't move forward. They walked backward, one careful step at a time, edging closer to where I lay, crumpled. Each print appeared fresh, wet enough to glisten under the stuttering light. I pushed myself up onto trembling elbows, my chest heaving, eyes locked on the trail advancing toward me. The crying voice broke into hiccuping breaths, the exact way I had sounded as a child when terror had wrung me dry. The tunnel breathed with me, a living lung of sorrow, while those backward steps drew near. Something had learned the shape of my voice. Something had learned the weight of my fear. And now it was teaching itself to wear the body of a child. I stumbled toward the narrowing glow, breath tearing in my throat. And there it was, a door at the tunnel's end, its paint the sickly shade of old bone. No sign, no number, no purpose. It simply waited, as though it had always been meant for me. My hand shook too violently to reach for the handle, but I didn't need to. The metal turned by itself, slow, deliberate, creaking as though savoring the moment. The door swung inward on a breath of cold so sharp it peeled the heat from my skin. Beyond it lay a platform, silent and abandoned, hidden beneath a station no map had ever claimed. Its tiles were cracked, its ceiling wept with condensation. But there was no dust, no decay, as though it had been tended in secret. The cries that had hounded me through the tunnel ceased all at once. In their place bloomed a silence so heavy it pressed against my ribs. Not emptiness, but a hush too absolute to belong to the living. I stepped across the threshold, every nerve in my body screaming that I had made a mistake. The moment my foot landed, the door swung closed with a solid click, the lock biting. Home! I spun, clawed at the handle, rattled the frame until my knuckles split, but it would not give. Whatever choice I thought I had made was already gone. The tracks ahead shivered. A rush of stale wind slithered up the platform, carrying the metallic stink of rust and something sweeter, rotting, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Out of the dark mouth of the tunnel, a train emerged. Its lamps were extinguished, its cars nothing but silhouettes. Every window was black, not reflecting, not transparent, but void, like staring into the eyes of something that could never die. The doors opened with a sigh, and the wind that poured from within lifted my hair, brushed my cheek like the touch of unseen fingers. I froze, heart hammering. Then I saw them, hundreds of mouths, faint shapes within the dark windows, opening wide in eerie unison. They moved without sound, lips forming the same phrase over and over. Welcome home. The words pressed into my chest, sealing me to that place. And for the first time, I understood that the screaming tunnel had never been about escape. It had always been about arrival. Night maintenance always began with a litany, rules that meant survival. Keep your feet clear of the rail. Trust the hum of the current. Never believe a tunnel that goes quiet. I clipped the harness to my belt, slid down into the track bed, and the air met me heavy and stale, thick with the stink of oil and vermin. My boots landed hard, scattering rats that poured away in waves, their claws scratching over stone like rainfall. I steadied myself, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. And that's when I saw it. Marks in the ballast where no marks should be. At first it looked like scuffs, the kind left by hurried boots. But these were different. They lined up in pairs, handprints and scrapes, a dragging rhythm pressed into the grit. They vanished under the third rail, a place no one should reach unless courting death. I crouched low, squinting, the sweep of the stones telling a story. Someone had been here. Someone had gone back and forth more times than I wanted to imagine, wearing a path in a place meant to kill. I ran my hand along the stones, the grit sticking damp to my skin. The tracks here were wrong, too clean, not swept by crews, not by chance. They had been cleared carefully, deliberately, as if someone cared about keeping their route visible. My flashlight trembled, spilling light over faint scratches on the steel itself, marks etched where no hand should touch. The silence pressed harder, so complete I could hear the thrum of blood in my ears. Even the rats had not returned. The tunnel seemed to lean closer, waiting, the air carrying a weight of things unsaid. I shifted my gaze toward the dark mouth beneath the rail, the hollow that gaped just wide enough for something to crawl through. The ballast dipped there, stones packed down as though a body had slid in and out countless times. Every instinct screamed to leave it alone, to climb back onto the platform and forget I had ever seen. But my lamp held steady, drawn forward, catching the faintest hint of something wet glistening under the lip of the steel. I swallowed hard, pulse racing, knowing I had found a path no one should have ever made. Whatever had been crawling there wasn't gone. It was waiting for me to notice. I crouched low, my fingers hooking under the rusted grate. It resisted, whining against the hinges, until with a shudder it gave way. A gust of air poured out, humid and foul, a mix of rot and something sweet that curled into the back of my throat. I gagged, pulling my sleeve to my face, but the smell clung, heavy and wet, like the breath of a cellar that had been sealed for decades. My lamp cut down into the dark, catching the edge of a void beneath the rails, a cavity too neat to be natural. Someone had made this. I lowered myself in, boots crunching against damp stone. The beam of light swept the chamber, and the sight stopped my breath cold. The walls were braced with scavenged timbers, planks scavenged from sleepers and debris, nailed at odd angles, holding back the weight of the earth. Bones dangled from the supports, knotted with sinew into crude charms that clicked softly as the draft stirred them. Each charm rattled like teeth in a jaw, whispering together in a voice just shy of language. Above me, the ceiling was strung with cords, woven into careful grids, perfect imitations of the tracks above. Knots tied tight, sagging with damp, dripping condensation down onto my shoulders. I stepped forward into the stink, lamp shivering in my grip, and saw nests scattered across the ground. Piles of rags, sodden and clumped with filth, each hollowed to fit a body that had curled there, long and low. Bowls sat nearby, carved from metal scraps, half filled with marrow, scraped clean. The rims were gnawed, teeth marks jagged and deep, as though whoever or whatever fed here had no patience for spoons. I stepped closer, the lamp grazing one of the bowls, and it tipped, spilling a smear of yellowed grease across the stone. My stomach turned to ice. On the far wall, dozens of tallies carved into the rock caught the light. Thin lines etched one over the other, precise, endless, stretching higher than any hand should reach. I ran my fingers across them, feeling the grooves worn smooth by repetition. Whoever had made them had worked for years, maybe decades, each stroke a patient promise. Behind me, the charms rattled louder, as though something had just passed through, brushing them in the dark. The chamber was too still, too heavy, my own breath coming back to me in ragged echoes. I shifted my weight, boot scuffing stone, and from the dark came an answer. Not the skitter of rats, not the hollow sigh of wind through cracks. This was wet, raw, a sound pulled from a throat. It started low, broken syllables strung together, as if language were something it had practiced in secret. Heart seized when it shaped a word that sounded like my name. Mangled but close, a grotesque attempt at recognition. It came again, clearer this time, closer. My name sharpened, less strained, and then it began to try others. Names I knew, names I loved, pulled from memory it should not have had. Each repetition grew stronger, surer, until the syllables carried the weight of familiarity, as though it had been listening for years through concrete, soaking every sound from the world above. My stomach knotted, bile creeping up as my lamp trembled in my hands. I snapped the beam toward the sound, desperate to expose it. The voices fell silent in an instant, swallowed whole by the dark. For a moment, only the hum of the lamp in my pulse filled the space. Then the light found something, an arm half hidden behind a timbered pillar. The skin was the color of wax left too long in the sun, pallid and slick with sweat that gleamed in the beam. Veins ran beneath it in blue webs, thick and unnatural, branching like subway tiles cracked with water lines. The arm shifted slightly, muscle twitching in a way that felt both human and not. My lamp slid lower, catching the hand. The fingers stretched, long and lean, curling against the stone. The nails were worn flat, blackened at the edges, crescents ground down from clawing at surfaces harder than bone. The hand flexed once, twice, deliberate, as if testing the air, as if trying to remind itself what flesh could still do. The whispers started again, softer now, almost coaxing. My name, clean this time, carried in a voice that might have been my own had it been dragged too long through tunnels and teeth. My chest locked. The hand pressed against the pillar, and I knew the rest of it was waiting, just out of sight, patient and hungry for the light to show its face. It slid out from behind the timber, not walking but dragging itself forward with a smooth, liquid pull. The body bent in places it shouldn't, ribs cording tight under translucent skin, each shift of muscle a grotesque map of sinew pulled too taut. Its shoulders rolled unnaturally, tilting in jerks that ignored the order of bones, as though it had been built wrong and taught itself to move anyway. My lamp trembled in my grip, the beam catching its face. It did not blink. Its eyes were nothing like mine, nothing like anything I had seen. Milky stones, clouded and blind, yet they reflected the light with a brilliance that cut straight into me. They glowed back like a cat's at midnight, but deeper, older, as if they had been staring long before eyes were ever invented. When its head tilted, the milky spheres quivered faintly, and my throat closed. The mouth opened slowly, splitting wider than it should, lips dry and cracked. The tongue that unfurled was a slab of pale flesh carved with letters, raw grooves etched by something sharp. Words slashed into its own muscle, darkened with old blood, letters overlapping, the scars of attempts too many, times to count. It wavered in the air, trembling before curling back into the cavern of its throat. The voice that spilled out was stitched together, jagged, unnatural. It was built from fragments, subway announcements warped by static, lullabies murmured in stairwells, the scolding of strangers carried through vents. All the sounds it had stolen, patched into one threadbare voice. Ticket, it rasped, syllables breaking into static, then reforming again. Ticket, please. I staggered back, bile burning my throat, but it pulled closer, dragging itself on elbows, its milky eyes unblinking, its grin jagged. The stench of it filled the chamber, damp iron and rancid marrow. I raised the lamp higher, the shadows twisting behind it, and that was when I heard it. Not just one. Breathing. From the dark behind. A tide rising, dozens of lungs dragging air at once, deep and eager. The chamber was not empty. The city above had been feeding this place all along, its lost sounds collected, its warmth stolen. And beneath the rail, hidden under stone and steel, they had learned patience. They had learned to wait. I scrambled for the grate, every nerve firing in panic, my fingers slipping on rust slick with condensation. The metal groaned as I hauled myself up, knees banging the stone, boots scraping against the chamber wall. Behind me, the whispers overlapped, layered with laughter that was too human and not human at all. My lungs burned, dragging air that felt like breathing through soil. But I climbed faster, desperate, knowing if I faltered even once, I would never surface again. The grate clanged shut as I shoved it into place, the sound sharp as a final nail in a coffin. I collapsed onto the track bed, chest heaving, hands trembling so hard the flashlight rattled in my grip. The third rail hummed at my side, its warmth searing through my knees, steady and alive. In that moment, it felt older than me, older than the city, a boundary humming with a power that those things below would not cross. I pressed myself against it, shaking as if it could guard me. From beneath, the noise did not stop immediately. A soft tapping rose first, steady and deliberate, knuckles or nails rapping the underside of the grate. Then came a laugh, hollow and broken, carrying every stolen voice I had heard stitched together into one. It scraped the marrow of my bones until I thought I would break from the sound alone. And then, nothing. Silence. Too clean. Too final. I fumbled for the radio at my belt, pressed the button. But when I tried to speak, my words clung heavy to my tongue, dripping with the taste of rust. My voice sounded wrong, like it had been chewed up and spat back out. The dispatcher asked me to repeat, but I couldn't. I shut the thing off and sat there, shivering, waiting for the courage to climb out of the pit. After that night, I never went back to that line, never again to that shift, that job, that part of the city. But the truth followed me, even in stations far away, with bright crowds and music spilling from open doors. I sometimes feel it. A breath against my ear, warm and damp. A whisper curling my name, pronounced in the exact cadence my mother once used to call me home. And when I hear it, I know with a certainty that rots me from the inside out. It crawled free. It knows where I am, and it is waiting. The chained carriage crouched at the farthest edge of the platform, its windows blackened with grime, its metal skin scabbed with rust. Torn caution tape fluttered weakly along its length, strips of yellow and black clinging like rotted funeral ribbons. No service, no entry, do not board. Warnings printed in stark letters that might as well have been prayers. Still, I lingered. Curiosity is a sickness that masquerades as bravery, whispering that the rules don't apply, that you will be the exception. That night, I listened. The glass was brittle beneath my touch, the window pane fractured into a spider web of cracks. I pressed harder, and the pane surrendered, collapsing inward with a delicate crash. My boots crunched over the shards as I slid inside, the sound loud in the cavernous dark. My pulse hammered, half from fear, half from the thrill of doing what was forbidden. The moment my soles hit the floor, the air shifted, heavy and sour, filling my lungs with the chill of basements long abandoned. Before I could turn back, the door behind me slammed. The noise was sharp, final, echoing down the length of the carriage like a lid snapping shut. I spun, heart in my throat, but the handle refused to turn. The chains rattled once, faint as laughter, then stilled. I was sealed inside. The cold was immediate, seeping through my jacket, burrowing into my skin. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from winter air. It was stiller, deeper, the cold of something that had never known sunlight. My breath hung white in front of me, trembling with each exhale. The silence pressed closer, thick as wool, broken only by the faint groan of the car settling on its rusted wheels. I let the beam of my phone sweep across the seats. Dust lay thick, undisturbed, except for narrow trails where something had been dragged across the cushions. The light caught stains I didn't want to name, dark patches that bloomed across the fabric like old wounds. I whispered to myself that it was nothing, just a dead car left to rot. But the air carried weight, a presence that had been waiting. I could feel it in the way the shadows lingered too long at the corners, in the way the cold never stopped pressing. I wasn't alone in that carriage. I never had been. The carriage groaned, metal bones shifting as though roused from a long sleep. Without warning, the floor lurched beneath my boots. The train was moving, not the clean surge of electricity pulling it along, not the steady rhythm of wheels guided by steel, but a dragging motion, as though something unseen had hooked into it and begun to haul. No station, no schedule, no driver. Just the sensation of being towed by a thing that lived in the black between stops. My stomach flipped, dread knotting into my spine. The lights above my head stuttered in sickly bursts, each flicker peeling more from the carriage. Advertisements along the walls sagged, their paper curling into brittle rolls, edges darkened like old scabs, tearing away from flesh. The faces on them were hollowed by rot, eyes bleached pale, grins stretched wider than ink should allow. They seemed to twitch when the light passed, frozen mid-smile, waiting for darkness to return. I bolted for the emergency release, fingers slick with sweat. My hand wrapped around the red-painted handle, yanking hard, but it resisted with a shriek. I pulled again, harder, and the entire thing wrenched free. I stumbled backward, staring at the useless piece of metal clutched in my hand. Grease smeared across my palm, thick and tacky, reeking of copper. The smell turned my stomach, sharp, metallic, the unmistakable scent of old pennies and dried blood. The windows clouded. A sheen of condensation spread across the glass, as though the carriage itself had begun to breathe. I wiped my sleeve against one pane, but the fog returned faster than I could clear it. Shapes bloomed within the haze, smudges at first, then patterns. Fingerprints, hundreds of them, each press distinct, layered over one another, overlapping in a mad collage of hands. Some were broad, adult, fingers long and splayed wide. Others were impossibly small, the size of a child's. They stretched upward as though clawing, each mark pressed from the inside out. My breath caught when one print appeared fresh, the condensation still running from it, even as I watched. The train rattled harder, chains groaning against an invisible leash, and I realized the prints weren't remnants of the past. They were being made now. The fog thickened, the shapes multiplying, and though the carriage should have been empty, I could hear it. Soft skin dragging across glass, countless palms pressing forward, eager to get out. The sound reached me first, a shuffle too soft for shoes, too steady for rats. I swung the beam of my phone under the seats, and that was when they began to emerge. Not walking, not upright, but dragging themselves forward on elbows and knees, the way hospital patients might crawl when every bone is broken, but the body refuses to stop. Their limbs moved in jerks, wrists twisting at wrong angles, palms smearing streaks across the floor as they pulled themselves free from the shadows. Their clothes clung ragged, scraps of fabric so thin they seemed grown into the flesh beneath, stitched by time and rot. Wet patches stained them dark, and each shift of their bodies made threads snap and cling like veins. They came slowly, too many of them, spilling into the aisle in a line that seemed to stretch beyond what the carriage could possibly hold. My light caught their faces, and my chest cinched tight. Eyes glowed in the dark, not bright but dim. A drowned lantern sheen like the eyes of fish washed up on a riverbank, clouded yet catching the light in a way that felt alive. Their gaze fixed on me, dozens of them, unblinking, reflecting back everything I didn't want to see. They did not speak. Not yet. Instead, they sniffed, heads tilted, nostrils flaring, mouths half open as though testing the air for scent. I could hear the wet rasp of their breathing, feel it stirring the hairs on my arms. Their jaws worked silently, teeth sliding across lips that hadn't learned how to shape sound. I thought, for a moment, that silence might be worse than words. Then one of them found it. My name. It spilled from its mouth, mangled at first, a warble of sound torn from somewhere unnatural. But then another repeated it, and another. My name rolled through the car, each voice adjusting, refining, until they said it perfectly. The exact cadence, the exact tone, spoken in unison. The sound filled the carriage, dozens of throats speaking me into the air, over and over, a hive mind savoring the sweetness of a new word. The way they said it was not recognition. It was ritual, it was worship. And beneath that worship, I could hear what truly coiled in their voices. Hunger, sharp and endless, waiting to devour what they had just named. My hands fumbled for the emergency hammer clipped beneath the window. The red plastic felt brittle in my grip, but desperation made me strong. I swung hard, the head cracking against the pane with a sharp report. The hammer shattered, fragments scattering across the carriage floor. But the glass stood unbroken, not even a crack to show for the blow. My breath stuttered in the silence that followed. And then I realized what the window was showing me. It wasn't my world. The reflection gleamed bright, the carriage spotless, polished as though it had just rolled from the factory floor. Seats upholstered in clean fabric, advertisements crisp and fresh, lights buzzing steady above. It was the same car, but perfect, untouched, a lie painted in light. And it was empty. No crawling figures, no damp smudged fingerprints. Just stillness and order, like a dream of what this place had once been. I pressed closer, squinting, forehead almost touching the cold pane. That was when he appeared. A man strolled down the aisle in the reflection, tall and straight-backed, his dark uniform neat, brass buttons glinting. A polished hat shaded his eyes, but his mouth was clear, tidy, precise, smiling with professional calm. The kind of conductor who belonged to another era, when travel meant paper tickets and shining shoes and respect for timetables. He passed the rows without hurry, his stride measured. Then he turned, and his eyes, though hidden by the brim, seemed to catch me directly. He raised one gloved hand, slow and courteous, palm forward in greeting. His smile deepened as if he recognized me, as if he had been expecting this moment. The light in the reflection seemed warmer, safer, a pull like gravity urging me closer. I almost lifted my hand to return the gesture, aching for that world over the one I stood in. But then I felt it, cold, sudden, and wet, clamped around my ankle, fingers, or something pretending to be, slick with moisture, nails biting into my skin. The grip tightened, jerking me downward before I could even scream. My knees buckled, phone light lurching wildly across the crawling figures still huddled under the seats. They watched with their drowned eyes as the thing yanked again, pulling me toward the floor, dragging me down into the dark beneath the carriage. The train slowed with a shudder that rattled through my bones, the kind of halt that felt less mechanical than deliberate. My breath caught as the doors hissed open, and a draft slid inside. Cold, damp, carrying the smell of stone and water left too long in darkness. I lifted my head, heart hammering, and stared out at a platform that should not have existed. The tiles under the fluorescents were mottled yellow, the color of teeth long dead, stained and cracked. No map hung on the wall, no schedules or painted arrows to point the way. No sign bore a name. It was a station without memory, erased from the city's skin, yet waiting as though it had never been abandoned at all. I tried to move back, to wedge myself deeper into the seat, but the figures stirred. The ones that had crawled and whispered now stood, rising with jerks and creaks like marionettes remembering how to walk. Their drowned eyes fixed on me, their rag-thin clothes clinging, but they did not lunge. Instead, they parted down the center aisle, peeling away in silence, leaving a clear path to the waiting platform. An invitation. The air beyond the doors was thicker than the car, humid and sour. It carried with it something worse than decay, an echo of human joy twisted into something else. Old rain, long-forgotten laughter, the faint suggestion of lives that had once passed through here, ground down into residue, smeared into the very stones. I gagged on it, bile rising, but my body leaned forward, trembling as though the choice had never been mine. The figures raised their heads as one, lips working silently, mouths opening and closing in rhythm with the gusts of air. My legs buckled, a scream ripping loose, raw and loud. But the sound did not carry. The doors slid shut with a finality that sealed it inside with me. My scream lived there now, another voice added to the hundreds already pressed into the walls. The lights dimmed, the platform slipped backward, and with a violent lurch, the carriage began to move again. Chains groaned against the dark. The car dragged along like prey caught in the jaws of something unseen. The figures settled back into their nests, patient, content. The train had fed, and somewhere ahead, it would wait again, hunting for the next curious hand, brave or foolish enough to reach through broken glass. The platform was alive with its usual noise. Heels clattering, tired sighs, the drone of fluorescent lights humming overhead. I blended into the crowd, just another body waiting, until the speaker crackled. At first it was nothing unusual, just static clearing its throat. Then it said my name. Not close to my name, not a slip of syllables that resembled it. My exact name, spoken in the precise cadence only family used, the sound of home folding itself through rusted wires. I froze. No one else reacted. Heads stayed bowed to screens, mouths moved around coffee cups, eyes glazed with routine. The speaker buzzed again, louder this time, and listed the street where I had grown up. The street no one outside my family could have known. My stomach dropped. The words carried the weight of memory, not information. The speaker did not stop. It pressed further, naming the dog we buried in the yard when I was still small enough to weep openly. The description was perfect. The patchy fur, the crooked paw, the spot of white on its muzzle. My knees softened, the tiles slick beneath my shoes. I wanted to tell myself it was coincidence, some bizarre overlap. But then the voice shifted lower, softer, into song, the lullaby, the one my father sang when storms cut the power and the house went black. The rhythm was wrong at first, stuttering through old wires, but it smoothed into something heartbreakingly familiar. The words, the tone, the warmth, everything carried through, but hollow, as if sung from under soil. The melody curled through the station, but still no one lifted their heads. They didn't hear. Or maybe they had chosen not to. I felt stripped, each secret turned inside out under the fluorescent snow of the lights. My hands trembled. My breath came shallow. I looked up toward the speaker, its black mouth open above the platform, and for the first time, I understood it wasn't speaking to all of us. It was speaking only to me. And I knew, with a terror I could not name, that if I stayed, it would keep going. It would unravel me memory by memory, until nothing was mine anymore. I moved without knowing why, weaving through the station's veins as if tugged by invisible thread. The voice poured from every corner, each crackle of a speaker guiding me deeper into corridors I had never seen drawn on any map. One hallway bled into the next, each turn folding impossibly into another, until the station felt endless, an intestine of tile and iron swallowing me whole. At every bend, another speaker hung, mouth open, waiting to drip my life back into my ears. At first, the memories it spilled were warm, almost sweet. The taste of summer peaches in the backyard, sticky down my wrist. The birthday when everyone sang out of tune and I laughed until my throat hurt. The sound of a voice I had not heard in years, resurrected to remind me what comfort felt like. For a moment, I wanted to stay, but sweetness curdled quickly. The voice sharpened. It told me of the lie I told when I swore I hadn't. The face of the person who cried because of me, their name drawn slow and cruel, syllables dragged until they bled. It whispered the worst thing I had ever done, spoken in the flat tone of a witness who had never forgotten. The sound burrowed beneath my ribs, coiling like wire. I stumbled, pressing my palms to the tiled wall, but the voice did not let me rest. It listed the hour when I almost chose not to live, when the world nearly folded without me, and it named the quiet detail no one else knew, the place, the tool, the way my hand had shaken. My breath caught, raw and shallow, and the corridors seemed to tighten around me. Then it told me about the letter, the one I had written late at night, words heavy as stones, tucked into a drawer, never mailed. No one should have known. But the speaker recited every sentence as if it had been the one to hold the paper, the one to tuck it away. The air thinned with each confession, heavy and sharp, stripping the oxygen from my lungs. It felt like I wasn't breathing air anymore, but the fragments of myself it stole. Each memory siphoned until my chest ached. The voice wasn't echoing my life back. It was feeding on it, devouring the only parts of me that had ever been mine. The corridor narrowed into a stairwell, steps chipped and slick with mildew, leading me upward into a tower of glass and shadow. At the top, a heavy door leaned half open, its hinges sagging with age. I pushed it wide and stepped inside the control booth. The air was stale, dust thick as velvet carpeting every surface, muting the scrape of my boots. The switchboard sprawled across one wall, but it was long dead. Knobs sat frozen in place, their labels worn to ghosts of letters. Fuses sagged, cracked and corroded, nothing more than brittle shells. Cables trailed across the floor, chewed to fluff by teeth older than the city, their veins of copper spilling like innards. By every law of time and decay, this room should have been silent forever. But the red light glowed. Above the microphone, a single bulb burned steady, a crimson eye pulsing faintly as if it had always been lit, as if it had never once flickered out. It cast a sickly glow over the booth, a reminder that something watched, something listened. My stomach dropped as the weight of that light pinned me in place. It should have been impossible, but there it was, steady and patient. The chair waited before the microphone, pulled back just far enough to suggest someone had stood a moment ago. The seat cushion bore a deep impression, a hollow shaped by the weight of a body that had leaned there for years, maybe decades. The fabric had worn smooth, darkened with the ghost of countless hours pressed into it. But the dust lying on its arms had not been disturbed in all that time. No one had sat there, no one human at least. And then the voice stopped. The booth fell into a silence that was not relief, but pressure. a silence that filled the space like water rushing into a chamber. It pressed close against me, intimate, expectant, as though waiting for me to speak into the microphone. My reflection stared back from the glass, pale and trembling, and I could not shake the feeling that it was not me being watched. It was me being invited. The booth had no sound, no movement, only the low red glow of the microphone eye. My pulse slowed to a painful crawl, each beat echoing in my ears. I thought I was alone. I prayed I was alone. But then the air shifted. Not a draft, not the chill of abandoned stone. This was breath. Warm, damp, drawn close against the back of my neck. I froze. It carried familiarity, the intimacy of someone I had once loved. The warmth pressed soft against my ear. And then it spoke my name. Not the sharp, public version strangers used, but the one softened at the end, the way only she had ever said it. A memory torn out of the past and breathed into me here. The syllables caught in my ribs, and for an instant I almost turned, desperate to see her, desperate to believe. I did not move. My reflection in the booth glass wavered, fog rolling over it. The condensation bloomed in perfect rhythm with the breath I felt, though it was not mine. A mouth hovered there, invisible but certain, fogging the glass so near my cheek that the heat of it made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat. And then the fog wrote. Letters formed backward, curling across the inside of the pane as though written from the other side. I strained to read them, my breath frosting beside them, my body trembling as each letter revealed itself. 3 words. We are so close. My knees weakened. The phrase pulsed in my mind. Not a comfort, but a promise. A claim that left no room for escape. The fog lingered, the letters smearing slowly downward, dripping like tears. Then the mouth drew a shape. Not words this time, not language. Just a smile. Wide, toothless. A curve too long, dragging across the glass until it split my reflection in two. The fogged grin glowed faintly in the red light, and for the first time since entering the booth, I understood I had not been called here to listen. I had been called to answer. I bolted from the booth, lungs tearing at the air, shoes skidding over dust-slicked tile. The red glow dimmed behind me, but the sound followed. Every speaker overhead sputtered to life, spitting static that rolled into laughter, jagged and wet, bouncing through the empty holes. I clapped my hands to my ears, but the voice still found me, slicing through bone and blood, as if my body were nothing but wire. It no longer recited my past. That was done. Now it hissed out my future. Dates I did not want. Places I had never been but would someday stand, details so sharp they cut before they landed. I tried not to listen, but each syllable crawled inside me, lodging like burrs. I ran harder, tears stinging my eyes, begging myself not to believe what it said. The corridors warped into a blur, every turn spitting me into another row of turnstiles, each one locked, each one humming faintly with the voice that lived inside the wires. I shoved at the bars until my palms bruised, breath scraping my throat raw. The laughter slid lower then, softer, intimate. The air shifted again, warm against my cheek, and I knew it had leaned close. I could taste it. The dust of the booth, the copper of static, the faint rot of disuse. Lips that were not lips brushed my ear. And in a whisper gentler than any lullaby, it spoke. You will come back when you are tired of secrets, it said, careful and patient. And we will finish the list. The gate gave way then, or I dreamed it did. I staggered through and into the night air, the city roaring alive above me. Headlights, voices, the sound of life carrying on as though nothing had happened. I stumbled home, locked every door, stuffed my ears with fabric, desperate for silence. But silence never came. That night, sleep folded me under, and still the announcements arrived. They came precise, punctual as trains, every whisper right on schedule. They told me things I had not lived yet, names not yet spoken, failures I had not committed but would. The voice was always calm, always exact. And I knew, with the weight of inevitability pressing into my chest, that one day I would return. Not because it called me, but because it had promised I would. She was so far down the tunnel I thought at first my eyes were lying. A pale blur, maybe just a reflection of light on the steel. But then the shape held, and the blur became a child. A girl no taller than my chest, standing dead center between the rails. Her dress clung white against the black, a single flame against soot, and she did not shift, not even to breathe. Panic tore my throat raw before I even knew I was shouting. I waved both arms, shouted her way, screamed until spit laced my chin. But no one turned. The platform around me was alive with commuters, heads bent toward phones, eyes glazed in the indifference of late hours. A sea of faces bobbing, shoes shuffling, hands clutching briefcases. And not one of them looked into the tunnel. They could not see her, or would not. The air vibrated with the approach before the rails began to hum. A low note grew sharp, the rising wail of an oncoming train, metal singing hunger into the hollow dark. My stomach dropped, a cold tide of helplessness rushing through me. She stayed where she was, knees together, bare feet pressed on stone, hands at her sides, as though she had been planted there. The tunnel's breath rolled out hot and sharp, headlights slicing through the black like eyes opening. The platform rumbled, dust shaking loose from the ceiling, and the crowd shifted only to ready themselves for boarding. I screamed again, body leaning forward as if to leap, but my words dissolved in the roar. She did not move. Not an inch. The train sang louder, its steel voice breaking into a shriek that filled my skull. And still, she waited. Pale dress blazing against the dark, a match burning slow, just long enough for me to see her face. And when I did, my heart faltered. She wasn't looking at the train. She was looking at me. The train should have torn her apart, should have scattered bone and blood down the length of the tunnel. But when steel met her, it did not strike. It entered. The white of her dress came apart in a burst of vapor, threads unraveling like a bridal veil caught in a storm. For a heartbeat, she was nothing but mist, drifting in the turbulence, and then she was gone. The train screamed past, lights blinding, faces blank behind the glass. By the time the cars rattled out into daylight, I knew she had not stayed in the dark. The air shifted behind me. I spun, heart pounding, and there she was. Whole again, no rips, no blood, no dust. Standing among the crowd on the platform, though no one's shoulder brushed hers, no eye glanced her way. My lungs stuttered. She was close enough now for the details to etch themselves into me. The smell came first. Cold water from forgotten cisterns, pennies wet with rust. It clung to her, seeping into my mouth with every breath until I tasted metal on my tongue. She stepped forward, her bare foot pressed to tile without sound, no squeak, no scuff. Silence followed her like a cloak. I tried to back away, but my legs locked. My gaze was trapped in hers, eyes darker than night, darker than shadow. They were not eyes at all, but wells, bottomless and pulling. Looking into them was falling, endless falling. And in their depths I saw, not just this platform, not just this moment, but row after row of stations, each tiled differently, each humming with its own crowd. And in every one of them, I stood. Sometimes shouting, sometimes frozen, sometimes already stepping toward her. Dozens of me. Hundreds, each replaying the instant I failed to move in time. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. She didn't need to speak. The truth spilled straight from her gaze into me. I had always been here. I had always been too slow. The only difference was how long it took me to realize she had already chosen me from the start. Her hand found me before I could step away. A child's hand, small and light. But the moment her palm pressed against my forearm, my skin turned to stone. Nerves numbed, veins stilled, a ring of winter tightening around the bone until I couldn't feel the blood inside me. The cold spread outward, teeth of ice gnawing through muscle, anchoring me to her. I glanced around in panic, begging the crowd to notice, but the sea of commuters swayed on, blind and unbothered. To them, nothing had happened. She lifted her face toward mine, moving with a slowness that made time itself feel wrong. Her mouth neared my ear as though she meant to whisper, but I knew before she spoke that the sound would be wrong. Her lips opened and closed like she had studied the shape of words only from photographs, mimicking the idea of language without knowing its weight. I saw the word form, clear as glass: help. The plea was etched into her mouth, each syllable sculpted with precision, but the sound never followed. My ears strained for it, but there was only silence. It was like watching a television with the volume cut. Gestures robbed of their humanity, a language made hollow. The absence of her voice filled me with more dread than any scream could have carried. Her touch tightened, the frost circling deeper, threatening to sink through marrow. My throat worked uselessly, a groan scraping out, too low for anyone else to hear. The world around us carried on. Announcements crackled, footsteps clattered. Someone laughed into their phone. And yet, here I stood, frozen beneath the weight of something that wasn't alive, trying to pretend it was. Then the tunnel shifted. A rush of air surged past us, hot and heavy, stirring coats and hair, the unmistakable breath of another arrival. The platform rumbled underfoot, the rails whining, metal grinding somewhere in the black. Another train was coming, faster than the last, bright and hungry. Her eyes met mine again, wells without bottom, and she mouthed the word once more. Help. This time it stretched wider, the shape of her lips fracturing at the corners. The wind pushed harder from the tunnel, and I knew whatever she was, whatever she wanted, it was not going to wait for me to answer. Her grip tightened. My body betrayed me. She tugged once, lightly, like a child pulling a sleeve, yet my legs bent to her will. My boots scraped forward, sliding against tile slick with grime, until I stood only breaths from the edge. The tunnel ahead glowed faintly, a curve of light swelling brighter with every passing second. It was the glow of an approaching train, blooming like sunrise, promising an end. I tried to resist, muscles straining, but my feet refused me. Every command my mind screamed dissolved before it reached them. I dug my heels into the platform, leaning back with all my weight, and still I moved forward, inch by inch. Desperation rose sharp in my throat, and I turned to the glass walls of the station, to the reflection cast back from the arriving cars. There, I saw myself as I truly was. My reflection fought, legs braced, teeth clenched, arms jerking backward against an invisible force. In the real world, my body betrayed none of it. My limbs slack, obedient, yielding to her pull. The reflection screamed where I could not. face twisted with panic, hands clawing at air I couldn't touch. My palms slid across the edge, leaving streaks on the cold tile lip. I looked down, expecting to see the shape of my hands. But the smears were smaller, impossibly so. Child-sized. Tiny fingerprints lined the rim where mine should have been, prints damp and perfect, as though she had marked my place for me long before I arrived. The platform rumbled beneath my knees, the vibration crawling upward, filling my chest like a drumbeat. But it wasn't terror that the sound carried. It was something warmer, something treacherous. The rhythm moved inside me the way a beloved song does, the kind you hum without thought, the one that buries itself in memory so deep it feels like yours. The train burst into view, lights glaring, steel screaming against steel. I tried to look away from her eyes, but their pull was endless. Dark wells swallowing me whole, promising I had always belonged here. And as the roar of the engine swallowed the world, my body leaned further forward, ready to fall. At the last breath before steel met flesh, something inside me tore loose. I wrenched my arm away, muscles screaming, and fell backward hard against the platform. My shoulder cracked against tile, pain blooming hot and sharp. But the grip was gone. The train roared past, a furnace of speed and heat exhaling across my body, blasting my hair back, rattling my teeth in my skull. I lay pinned by the thunder, every wheel slicing the air where my body had almost been. When the last car screamed into silence, I dragged myself up on shaking elbows. My chest heaved, heart a wild bird thrashing inside its cage. I searched the rails, the tunnel, desperate to believe she had vanished with the train. But she hadn't. She stood just beyond the yellow line, her dress as white as before, unstained, untouched, a figure cut from frost and shadow. Her hands folded neatly at her waist, her head tilted with the calm of someone studying a puzzle they had already solved. Her eyes drank me in, black and bottomless, but her smile carried no malice. It was worse than malice. It was patience. The kind of patience winter has. The kind that waits without hurry, knowing that eventually all warmth will fade. Her hand rose again, palm open, small fingers reaching, steady, certain. The gesture was not insistent. It was inevitable. I scrambled to my feet, knees weak, body trembling with the weight of the moment. I couldn't bring myself to scream again. My throat was raw, useless. I turned, pushed through the indifferent crowd, each step a stagger until I reached the stairwell. I didn't look back, though I felt her gaze track me, following, not as threat, but as promise. I left that station and never returned. Not once, not in years. But the truth followed me. Every tunnel hums with the memory of her pull. Every rumble of an approaching train feels like her hand closing around my wrist. And sometimes, in the blur of glass as the cars fly past, I see her. A child in white, waiting in silence, patient as winter. There will always be one. Every tunnel has a child, and every child is waiting. Midnight trains are lullabies built from steel and sway, the rocking motion pulling the body into a trance. I slipped inside, grateful for the hush, and found the car already full. Every seat was taken, each passenger bent forward slightly, heads bowed in near-perfect unison, as though the weight of exhaustion had folded them all into prayer. Their faces hung loose, mouths parted, chins sunk against their chests. I felt a strange comfort in the sight. A crowd, yes, but a silent one, a place where I could rest my mind without intrusion. I slid into a seat by the window, bag tucked tight to my chest. The quiet wrapped me like a blanket. The hum of the train was steady, soothing, and for a moment I almost surrendered to it, letting my eyes slip half shut. But then something needled at me, a wrongness small enough to ignore at first. The glass. In the glow of the overhead lights, not one window fogged. My breath left faint clouds against the pane, vanishing slow. But around me, dozens of bodies, dozens of lungs, nothing. The glass stayed clean, clear, unmarked. I frowned, pulse tightening. I looked closer. Not a chest in sight rose or fell. Their stillness wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't the weary collapse of commuters lulled by motion. It was absolute, frozen. The silence that had seemed a blessing turned too sharp, too total. A stillness without pulse, without breath. I shifted in my seat, the upholstery groaning under me, and the sound cracked across the quiet like a whip. No one stirred. No one twitched, not even the smallest flinch. They sat locked in their perfect poses, dream angles unbroken, every head bowed. A bead of sweat slipped cold down my temple. I rubbed my palms against my jeans, forcing myself to glance from face to face. Each mouth slack, lips dry, skin pale in the fluorescent glow. Their eyes stayed hidden beneath lids, but I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The car was full, yet I was alone. A photograph come to life, only enough to hold me. My breath fogged faintly against the window, a smear on the glass that proved me real. The only smear in a picture too still, too perfect. And suddenly I knew. The quiet hadn't been a gift. It had been a trap. I rose too quickly, the motion jerking my seat back against the wall. The sound cut sharp through the silence, and for an instant I thought nothing would come of it. But then the nearest passenger shifted. Not their head, not their mouth, just the eyes. Their lids stayed sealed, lashes pressed shut. Yet beneath them, something peeled open. Dark pupils revealed themselves through the thin skin, wide and gleaming, perfect coins swallowed in black. My stomach clenched. The ripple spread. Across the car, one by one, the same unveiling occurred. Eyes blooming open beneath still lowered lids, shining through the flesh as though sight had never needed to pierce skin. A human wave of awakening rolled toward me, each face slack, each body rigid, yet every gaze fixed sharp and exact on where I stood. The heads followed next. Slowly, deliberately, they tilted. Necks creaked in uncanny rhythm, rolling toward me with a precision too clean to be chance. Not frantic, not startled, rehearsed. It was choreography. A dance honed over months of waiting for someone foolish enough to break the stillness. I stumbled back, my knees brushing the seat edge, pulse hammering. The air thickened instantly, wrapping me in syrup I couldn't swallow. Breathing was work now. Each inhale heavy, sticky, reluctant. It filled my lungs with sweetness that burned, air that felt borrowed. The car's kindness, the lull of its hush, was gone. What remained was ownership, the atmosphere curling with the confidence of something that no longer cared to be shared. My throat tightened. Every body remained bent, hands clasped in laps, heads bowed but not asleep. They were waiting, watching, each one tethered to me now by their wide black pupils pressed beneath lids too stubborn to lift. I tried to move toward the door, but the weight of that collective stare pinned me. My legs shivered as though they no longer belonged entirely to me. Around me, the sleepers inhaled in unison for the first time. Not quick, not sharp. Long, dragging breaths that drew the thick air deeper, pulling me with it, as if they were teaching me how to breathe their way. And in the syrupy silence between those inhalations, I understood. They had never been passengers. They had been waiting for me to rise. One by one, they began to stand. It should have been noisy. Shoes scraping against tile, coats shifting, fabric rustling. But not a sound escaped them. Their movements were too careful, too rehearsed, like marionettes pulled by strings no one else could see. My skin prickled as the silence deepened, broken only by the low thrum of the train beneath us. Their mouths twitched as they rose, corners pulling upward in fractured gestures, uncertain, hesitant, as if they were testing the mechanics of smiling for the very first time. None of the expressions were complete, just approximations, faces cracking into near grins that never reached the eyes. Each attempt seemed less human, a rehearsal for an emotion they had never felt but wanted to wear. They shifted closer, not rushed, not aggressive. Calm, deliberate, polite almost, as though playing hosts to a guest they had been expecting. Step by step, they formed a circle around me. Shoulders angled inward, the geometry tightening until the ring was closed. I stood at its center, my breath shallow, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to flee on its own. They kept their hands low, hanging limply at their sides, not threatening, not raised. Yet their shoulders leaned forward just enough to close the space, to build a wall of bodies I could not slip through. A cage made not of force, but of inevitability. It was then I noticed the marks on their fingers. Bare hands, pale in the harsh light. But each left ring finger bore the faint indentation of metal long removed. The shadows of wedding bands still clung to their flesh. Perfect outlines etched into skin, circles that would not fade even after years. A shiver raced through me. These had once been people, once tethered to lives, to vows, to someone waiting at home. Now they waited only for me. Their almost smiles widened, jagged, cracked imitations of welcome. The silence pressed harder, thick with expectation, as though the air itself leaned forward. I stepped back, but their shoulders tilted closer, tightening the wall. No words, no sound, just the pressure of presence. I realized then the horror was not that they surrounded me. It was that they acted with the courtesy of ushers, guiding me toward a place I had not chosen, but they had already reserved. The car flickered once, twice, then sank into black. In the dark, the silence broke. Not with voices, but with touch. A hand, cold and dry, brushed against my wrist, fingers feathering across the pulse, holding it for a moment before letting go. Another set of fingertips followed, sliding down the ridges of my spine as though counting vertebrae, weighing each bone to decide where I might bend, where I might break. My breath stuttered loud in the void, the only sound not rehearsed. When the lights returned, the circle was unchanged. Every body still bowed in that mockery of posture, hands at their sides, shoulders forward. But the faces, oh, the faces had shifted. No more twitching mouths, no more hesitant experiments. They had all arrived at the same conclusion, the same expression, patience. It stretched across every pair of lips, filled every pair of eyes, as if a single mask had been split into dozens and pressed upon them all. They were not eager. They were not cruel. They simply had time. More than enough time to wait for me to surrender. The hum of the train deepened, vibrating through the soles of my shoes, pressing up into my legs like a second heartbeat. The overhead speaker gave a sudden crackle, static pouring through in a hiss that sounded almost like rain hitting pavement far away. I froze, straining to catch words, but none came. Just that endless drizzle of sound, spilling through wires long dead, drenching the air with static wetness. And then it happened. They inhaled, every one of them, at once. The sound was cavernous, lungs opening together, the car itself breathing around me. My chest seized in panic, the air dragged too thin by their collective draw, every atom snatched away. I bent forward, gasping, my own lungs collapsing against the tide. The patience in their eyes never flickered, not even as their ribs expanded, their bodies swelling with the breath they had stolen. I felt it then. The truth pressing down on me in the hum, in the static, in the air grown syrup thick. This wasn't the first time. They had done this before, again and again, for whoever stood where I now stood, and they would keep doing it until there was no breath left to take. They parted their lips at last. The sound did not belong to one, but to all. 100 throats released a single word, shaped in perfect unison, polished by silence until it was sharp, enough to cut. Stay. The syllable slid into my ears and down my spine, soft as a lullaby, heavy as an oath. I staggered backward, though there was nowhere left to go. The doors hissed behind me. Their sigh was long, mournful, like a body relieved to be whole again. Then the rubber edges pressed together, sealing tight with a kiss too tender, too final. My way out vanished in that soft meeting, and the sound hollowed my chest with dread. I told myself to run. My brain screamed it over and over, each thought louder than the last. Run, move, break through. But my body betrayed me. My knees trembled, softened, and gave. I sank into the swaying belly of the car, rocked by its rhythm as though the steel itself had decided to cradle me. The ring around me shifted closer, slow and unhurried. They no longer needed to lean, no longer needed to try on smiles. Their patience had ripened into certainty. Step by step, they closed the gaps until the circle was seamless. Shoulders pressed against shoulders, bodies against bodies, until they weren't passengers at all anymore. They were the walls. They were the ceiling. They were the floor beneath my shoes. The car had become them, and I had become theirs. The train rocked harder, the sound of rails a heartbeat beneath me. My eyes slipped shut though I fought it, lids heavier than stone. I breathed in their rhythm, out of sync at first, then slowly matching, until my lungs no longer knew whose air they carried. When I woke, if I woke, it was not to the brightness of a station, not to the voice of arrival. There were no stops left, no maps, no exits. Only the endless sway of motion. Only the rhythm that keeps time in the dark, a lullaby that rocks forever. While the sleeping crowd watches with patient eyes and waits for the next to join. The shaft dropped away from the world above, deeper than any service path had reason to go. My rope creaked against the metal lip, gloves slick with grime as I lowered myself into the dark. The descent felt endless, walls damp with condensation that smeared beneath my touch. When my boots struck ballast, the air hit me first. It pulsed, moving in tides as though the cavern itself breathed, warm with a presence that was not mine. The sound followed. A chittering tide, claws scratching stone, a ripple of tiny bodies in endless motion. They came from the shadows in silver currents, pouring around my boots, their fur shining in the glow of my headlamp. Rats by the dozens, then hundreds, weaving together into living rivers that never touched me, never climbed me, only flowed past as if pulled by command. My skin crawled all the same, but a deeper instinct stirred. This was not chaos. This was order. I have never believed in crowns for vermin. Never believed the whispered stories from other crews, men too tired or drunk, telling of a monarch buried in the bones of the city. I laughed them off, called it folklore for tunnels. But then the tide changed. The swarm halted as one, a hush of movement, and then they parted. A path opened through the seething carpet of fur, straight as a corridor, every rat standing still at its edges. Their black eyes glittered in unison, reflecting back my beam until the dark seemed jeweled. My heart hammered at the sight, a pulse too loud in the silence. And at the end of the living aisle, it waited. A throne, impossible and obscene, rose from the cavern floor. Wire twisted into spirals, lengths of cable braided with ribs and femurs scavenged from something larger than rats. Metal and bone fused together, sharp and wet-looking, glinting like teeth under my light. Around its base, skulls lay like discarded offerings, polished smooth by countless whiskers brushing past. The sight rooted me in place. It was not the throne of men. It was older, fouler, something built by hunger given form. And in that moment, with the current of rats waiting, still as stone, I realized that maybe crowns were real. Only this one had been gnawed into existence, worn by something that understood patience better than kings ever could. It sat upon the throne as if born to it. A rat, yes, but no rat I had ever known. Its bulk rivaled a stray dog, thick with muscle beneath its fur, its body scarred with a history of endless fights won. The crown was no accident. Loops of wire twisted around its head, crooked and biting into flesh, a diadem forged not by hand, but by teeth and persistence. The throne had not been found. It had been built. And those eyes, God, those eyes. They were not the red glass of vermin, nor the black beads of scavengers. They were round, wet and waiting, human in their patience. They held me the way only people do, weighing, measuring, deciding. My knees nearly bent under the gaze, as though instinct already knew what it meant to bow. Around it, the lesser bodies moved as one. No scrambling chaos, no scratching scramble. They filed into neat rows, forming aisles of obedience that stretched into the dark. Each lifted its nose, little whiskers quivering, as though scent alone could bind them to ritual. Their tiny hands folded against their bellies, a grotesque mimicry of worshippers in some ruined church. The symmetry turned my stomach. It wasn't mimicry, it was devotion. The air thickened, layered with the musk of their bodies. Fur, damp and rank. Oil slicked across stone from years of their passage, rubbed into every seam of the chamber. And beneath it all, a sweetness, stale and sour, the smell of bread gone hard, carried down by teeth and cherished like relics. The scent rose around me, curling through my throat, burning as it filled my chest. The creature on the throne shifted once, its long tail dragging slow across the bones at its feet. The sound was deliberate, like a priest clearing his throat before sermon. Every smaller body froze. A silence deeper than absence settled in the chamber. My own breath became sacrilege, an uninvited noise. Then, without sound, the great head dipped. Not to acknowledge me, to recognize, to claim. And I felt it, hot and crawling, in the marrow of my bones. I had not stumbled into their chapel. I had been brought to kneel. I told myself it was the air, too stale and too heavy, thick enough to birth hallucinations. But then I saw it. At the edge of the chamber, half buried in shadows, a mound lay against the wall. Not stone, not trash, shoes. Dozens of them, leather rotted, fabric split, laces snapped. Each pair had been knotted together, not by hand, but by tails. Twisted, dried tails that wove them into a single grotesque mass. My stomach lurched. These were not scavenged scraps. They were trophies. I backed away, and something delicate cracked beneath my boot. The sound was light, brittle, almost like glass breaking under pressure. I forced my eyes downward and saw the pale glint of bones, small and thin, strung together in a chain. Finger bones, a rosary of knuckles and phalanges, polished by years of handling, the crude loop still dangling intact as though waiting for prayer. The sight pulled bile to my throat, and I stumbled, shaking. That was when the king moved. The immense body hunched forward on its throne of wire and bone. Its bulk shifted with gravity's patience, as though it had all the time in the world to notice me fully. The air quivered, heavy with the musk of fur and the heat of countless tiny bodies holding their stillness. And then the voice came, not through ears, not through sound. A pressure bloomed inside my skull, as though the marrow of my thoughts had been tapped like a vein. It was not a word I heard, not really. Yet it carved itself into me as clear as any command barked aloud. Serve. The syllable was heavy, not spoken but hammered, forged in a furnace of hunger and patience. It burned without sound, seared into the folds of my brain, impossible to ignore. My knees trembled, and I dropped lower without meaning to, the weight of the command bending me the way gravity bends rivers. This was no request, no bargain, no invitation whispered in shadow. The king's word had been forged in blood and obedience, repeated for generations in the tiny ears of its swarming congregation. It carried the certainty of tradition, of law, of fate. Serve. And in that hollow chamber, surrounded by rats that did not move, I understood that no crown made of gold had ever ruled so completely. They came without warning, a tide breaking its stillness. The smaller bodies surged forward, climbing my boots, my shins, my thighs, until I was wrapped in a shawl of fur and tails. Their weight pulled at me, anchoring me where I stood, each movement precise, intentional. Teeth grazed my skin through cloth, tasting, testing, but never biting deep. Whiskers twitched against me, tracing lines over arteries and veins as if mapping out the blue rivers beneath my flesh. I froze, afraid to move, afraid that one wrong twitch would tip their restraint into frenzy. But they did not feed, they worshipped. Their motions were ritual, their stillness rehearsed. I was no longer an intruder. I was part of the ceremony. The king rose. With the grace of age, of something ancient that had never known fear, the massive rat descended from its throne. Its steps were deliberate, slow, carrying the weight of dignity. Not a predator lunging, not a beast scrambling. A monarch descending from a porch to greet the newest member of his congregation. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it might drown out the silence. But every eye, hundreds, thousands, stayed locked on him, their devotion undivided. He reached me. The swarm parted just enough for him to press close, towering in his grotesque majesty. His nose brushed my forehead, soft and damp, the touch lighter than a kiss, but its weight broke me open. And then the story poured in. Not words, not images, but knowledge raw and complete, burned into my bones like memory I had always carried. The tunnels were his cathedral. Every pipe a hymn, every arch a vault, every drip a note in an endless liturgy. The rivers belonged to him, the flood and the filth, all of it bent to his will. For centuries he had ruled unseen, his dominion stretching beneath the careless feet of men who thought themselves kings. He had priests, thousands of them. They walked unnoticed above and below, carrying his whispers, feeding his empire, ensuring his survival. And now he leaned into me, pressing deeper, his breath warm against my skin, and I knew what he demanded. He needed one more. When I clawed my way back to the surface, it was not triumph but flight. My palms were stripped raw, skin torn and red from scraping stone. My throat burned as though I had swallowed rust, and every breath carried the bitter taste of copper. city lights above seemed too bright, too sharp, as if they had been waiting to reveal what I had become. I told myself I had escaped, that I had left the throne, the swarm, the weight of that word behind. But days later, the proof began to surface. I would wake with crumbs in my pockets, crumbs I had never bought, never eaten, dry crusts of bread tucked away like offerings. My hands worked while I slept. I would find trash in my room, neat stacks of wrappers and scraps I did not remember carrying, sorted with the care of ritual. The memory of his nose at my forehead lingered like a scar you cannot see but always feel. At odd hours, in empty stations, I would catch the hum of the floor differently. Not just the pulse of trains, but something softer, steadier, a vibration like a purr. The tunnels breathing beneath me, pleased, content. Once, waiting for the last ride of the night, the crowd thinned until I stood alone. That was when the tide came. Rats poured from the gaps, a silver flood rippling across the platform. They parted for me without hesitation, forming a path through their shifting bodies. My knees bent before I could stop them. My head bowed, low, not from fear, but from something heavier, older, courtesy. That was the word that came to me. Majesty deserves courtesy. And so I gave it, without question, without thought. I bowed until the tide passed, until the shadows swallowed them whole again. When I straightened, heart pounding, there was no laughter, no whisper, just the knowledge that I had not resisted, that I could not resist. The king's word had burrowed deep. I had not left his domain. I carried it with me, a crown invisible but unshakable, pressed tight around my skull. And every time the tunnels hum beneath my feet, I know he waits, patient as stone, for the day I return to kneel again. I told myself it was exhaustion, that I had drifted into a dream carried on the rhythm of steel. The train rocked gently, its hum smooth, and the thought of one last stop before home was enough to let my eyes grow heavy. I leaned against the window, half asleep, counting the minutes. The doors would open soon, I thought. They always did. But they never did. Minutes stretched until they lost their shape. I checked my watch, then checked again. But the hands had stopped moving, frozen in a time I no longer recognized. The station never came. The voice never called. The car kept gliding forward, obedient, steady, as though there were no reason for alarm. Outside, the dark yawned forever. Tunnels bled into tunnels, black stitched with pale bulbs strung like dying pearls. The walls rushed past, the same graffiti sliding over and over again, too familiar to be chance. I pressed my face closer to the glass, searching for some marker, some turn, some sign that distance was being crossed. But the bulbs only repeated. My stomach tightened. I shifted in my seat, looking down the length of the car. Every row sat empty, cushions sagging under no weight at all. Not one other soul, not even the faint sign of someone having left. A jacket, a paper, a bag forgotten in haste. Just me, alone in a cradle of steel rocking endlessly forward. I rose and tried the doors between cars. Locked. The emergency release was sealed tight, the kind of jam that felt intentional, as though it had been welded shut. My hands sweated against the cold metal. The air tasted recycled, stale, thick enough to cling at the back of my throat. Panic gnawed at me. I pounded against the glass, shouting into the tunnels that blurred outside. No one answered. The sound only came back as a dull thud, swallowed by the steady hum of motion. I told myself to wait, that the stop would come, that maybe I had missed the call, maybe I had drifted too far. But even then, I knew the truth. The train was not heading anywhere I had ever been. The last stop wasn't late. It wasn't coming at all. I slammed my palm against the emergency button, the red plastic biting back at my skin. Nothing. No alarm, no shriek of halted brakes. Only the same hum, steady and calm, as if mocking the panic clawing up my throat. I pressed it again, harder, until my hand ached. The speaker above me wheezed, a long rasp like phlegm clearing from a throat unused. Then came the whisper, low, intimate, words I could not catch, syllables slurred into something meant only for me. My stomach turned to stone. I stumbled toward the connecting door and shoved it open, air rushing past me in a stale sigh. The next car stretched long and hollow, every seat upright and waiting, cushions dipped just enough to suggest someone had once sat there but left long ago. The silence of it rang louder than footsteps. I hurried on, heart racing, into the next, and the next. Each identical, each suffocatingly empty. My reflection followed me in the darkened windows, pale and frantic, multiplying in every pain. I told myself the emptiness should be a comfort. No eyes, no mouths, no one watching. But it wasn't true, because when I glanced back at the car I had just left, the seats were no longer bare. Blurred shapes filled them, outlines where people should have been, but never quite were. Figures bent in the posture of passengers, heads bowed, arms folded, rocking gently in time with the rhythm of the train. Their edges bled into the upholstery, as though the fabric itself had sprouted bodies. No faces, no details, only the heavy certainty of presence. I blinked, rubbed at my eyes, and they vanished, seats bare again. I staggered forward, pushing on into the next car, breath catching in the stale air. But when I turned my head once more, they were back. Dozens of them, swaying with the motion, a silent congregation that grew sharper each time I dared to look. I broke into a run, car after car. But the shapes followed, patient as shadows, always behind me, always watching. Rocking in time, waiting for me to join their rhythm. My fists hammered the steel doors, the echo traveling down the length of the car like a trapped animal clawing at its cage. I kicked until my foot throbbed, until the frame rattled but did not yield. The lights above me flickered, buzzing like angry insects, the car trembling with the effort of holding something back. For a heartbeat, I thought I had broken it, that maybe the train itself was about to give. Then the light steadied, and every seat was filled. Dozens of passengers sat where there had been none, row upon row of bodies that hadn't entered, hadn't passed me, hadn't existed until now. They swayed gently in unison, a soft rocking that matched the rhythm of the rails, heads tilted at unnatural angles, eyes closed, lashes brushing pallid cheeks. Their stillness was worse than chaos. It was the stillness of something rehearsed. I stumbled down the aisle, voice cracking as I shouted. My pleas rang out raw and desperate, bouncing back to me like laughter. I grabbed a shoulder, shook it hard. Cold, too cold. The body swayed but did not resist. No breath moved their chests. No fog touched the glass. I screamed louder, shaking another and another. My fingers dug into the fabric of their sleeves, the slack of their skin beneath. But still, no life came. My words poured into the void, begging, demanding, threatening. But the silence was unbroken, until their faces turned. As one, every head tilted toward me, eyelids still shut, lashes brushing pale skin. The sound of vertebrae creaked faintly, a chorus of bones straining in perfect unison. My own spine locked, the blood in my veins freezing as their mouths began to open, not in words, not in breath, in something far worse. The air spilled from them, pouring out in gusts that carried the scent of earth long buried, of damp stone, of graves sealed tight and split open again. It rolled over me, thick and suffocating, crawling down my throat until I gagged on the taste of soil. The train rocked, its rhythm unchanged, carrying me forward into tunnels without end. And all around me, mouths gaped wider, wider still, until the car was nothing but darkness and the reek of the earth they had carried with them. The train's pitch shifted, the hum beneath my feet thinning, the sway growing heavier. It was slowing. Relief tore through me like fresh air, dizzy and desperate. Finally, an end, a station, the chance to claw my way back into the world of light and noise. My chest shook with laughter that bordered on sobs. I pressed to the glass, heart hammering. But what loomed ahead was no station. The tunnel widened into a cavern, vast and raw, its walls glistening wet as though freshly carved by some patient mouth. My eyes strained to make sense of the gleam until the shapes resolved. Bones, thousands of them, pressed into the walls like tiling, ribs and skulls woven together in pale mosaics, grinning down in eternal witness. The relief drained out of me, leaving something colder. The train eased into silence, brakes sighing, and my breath fogged the glass. A platform stretched before me, though no map had ever shown it. Upon it stood figures in neat rows, their stillness heavier than stone. Their faces were painted white, smooth and hollow. No features but the impression of eyes and mouth, as though clay had been molded into half-forgotten memory. Their hands were clasped in front of them, a gesture almost gentle, almost reverent. Then, as one, they lifted their arms. Not frantically, not threatening. A slow, beckoning motion, patient as tide, summoning me as though I had always belonged to them. Welcome home. That was the weight of their silence. Welcome home, prodigal child. I staggered backward, shaking my head, throat raw with a scream that would not come. My body screamed flight, but my legs locked solid, muscles seizing with the iron will of something outside myself. I tried to command my knees, my ankles, but they refused, fixed like roots to the swaying floor. The hiss of air jolted me. The doors slid open on their own, rubber seals parting with a softness too intimate, too eager. The cavern's breath swept in, wet, sour, thick with the memory of soil and rot. The painted faces waited, arms still raised, the invitation unwavering. And with the doors yawning wide, I understood the truth. There was no leaving. The last stop had found me. I clung to the doorframe, every nerve begging me to step out, to obey the silent call of those painted figures waiting with arms raised. But some thread of defiance, thin and frayed as it was, held me. My knees shook, locked stiff against the command. I whispered no, barely audible, yet the word carried enough weight to tip the scale. The train groaned, steel shuddering as if disappointed. Then, with a sudden lurch, it surged forward, tearing itself from the cavern's grasp. The figures slipped into shadow, their pale masks receding until they were swallowed whole by the dark. I collapsed into the nearest seat, chest heaving, trembling with a relief that felt more like reprieve than escape. The darkness outside deepened, a black so endless it devoured the bulbs, the tunnels, the very sense of distance. We hurtled on through nothing, faster, always faster. I told myself I had survived, that I had won. But then I saw the window. My reflection stared back at me. Only it wasn't mine. The face in the glass was pale, too pale, skin chalked and smooth. Its lips curved into a smile I had not made, the red smear of it stretching wider than my own mouth would allow. Eyes, dark and sunken, gleamed with the painted emptiness of those I had left behind. And the lips moved, soundless, patient, syllables forming in silence that my heart already understood. Behind me, the car sighed. The weight of bodies settled into seats that moments before had been empty. I didn't need to turn to know they were there. The still passengers, the blurred ones, filling row after row with their quiet sway. The rhythm of the train matched their motion, each tilt a lull, each rock a command to join. I pressed my palms against my face, refusing to look again, but the truth was already inside me. The last stop never comes, not because the train is lost, not because the tracks stretch on without end. It never comes because I have already arrived. And the passengers who were never there are waiting still, swaying with the rhythm that will rock us all forever in the dark. The train plunged into the dark, lights overhead flickering once before surrendering. Then it came, the scream. It started as a single note, shrill and piercing, so sharp it felt like it had been threaded through bone, tugging my marrow into its vibration. My teeth clenched against it, ears ringing. But no one else moved. Every passenger around me sat rigid, hands folded in laps, faces blank and forward-facing. Not one eye shifted, not one body flinched. It was as though I alone could hear it, as though the sound had skipped the air entirely and poured straight into me. The scream grew louder, multiplying, splitting into voices that layered upon one another. Men, women, children, young and old, countless, throats joining in perfect dissonance. They clawed at the same pitch, a wordless note stretched until it broke into itself, scraping raw at the edges. I covered my ears, but it made no difference. The sound was inside me. It was more than sound. It was intrusion. The wail did not just rattle my skull. It dug. It slid fingers of noise down my throat, gripping, tearing, pulling something out. My breath caught in shallow bursts, chest tightening as if the scream had found a way to thread itself into my lungs. I gagged, bent forward, but nothing came out. The note continued, relentless, as if it had no beginning and no end, as though it had always been here, waiting for me to enter. The car rocked, wheels screeching against unseen curves, but the passengers never broke. Blank eyes stayed pinned to the blackened windows, unblinking, deaf to the howl that filled the world. The scream bent higher, sharper, until I thought my bones might split beneath it, until the lights overhead flickered again and the reflection in the glass showed me not myself, but a blur of mouths, all open, all screaming, all pressed against the other side. I shut my eyes. Hands clamped over my ears, but it was useless. The sound didn't need ears. It had me from the inside out. And deep in its pitch, woven into the tearing shriek, I swore I heard it form a shape, almost a word, something more terrible than silence. Stay. I crushed my palms against my ears, pressing hard enough that sparks of pain lit behind my eyes. It made no difference. The scream poured through bone and blood, bypassing skin entirely. It rattled my teeth as though someone drummed against them from the inside. My lungs convulsed, squeezed and battered by invisible fists. Every breath came shallow, ragged, as if the noise itself had taken residence beneath my ribs. The passengers sat unmoved, statues of flesh and cloth, hands still, eyes fixed straight ahead. Not even a twitch betrayed them. The only movement came from a woman across the aisle, her head tilted against the glass in weary repose. But the reflection staring back was wrong. In the black mirror of the window, she did not sleep. She was awake, her eyes wide and sharp, pupils pinned to me with a hunger that froze my throat. Her lips moved fast, syllables tumbling one over the other, too quick for comprehension, her silent mouth racing to keep pace with the wail that still scoured my insides. I could not hear her words, but I felt them. Each syllable brushed against my bones like moth wings made of knives. The scream twisted higher, sharper, no longer a sound, but a structure. It was not one voice. It was thousands, woven and knotted into a single, brutal rope of noise. Each thread burned with its own agony, and together they braided into something heavier, stronger, impossible to break. I felt it coil around me, tightening with each breath I failed to take. And then it pulled. My body lurched forward without command, knees scraping against the floor. The pressure dragged me, relentless, like a rope looped tight around my chest, hauling me toward the dark. I clawed at the seatbacks, nails splitting, desperate to anchor myself. But every muscle betrayed me, trembling, bending, straining toward the sound. The woman's reflection smiled, lips still moving too fast to follow. Her real body slumped motionless against the glass, but her mirrored self leaned closer, mouth stretching wide, wider still, until it was nothing but a hollow void, screaming silently in rhythm with the tunnel. And the rope of voices pulled tighter. The train bucked on its rails, a violent jolt that slammed my shoulder against cold steel. Overhead, the lights erupted into strobing bursts, slicing the car into fragments of motion. In one flash, the passengers sat as they always had, still, silent, frozen in their mockery of life. The next, their heads jerked at new angles, necks twisted too far, chins angled sharp toward their chests. Another flash. Their mouths split wider, lips peeling back until their gums showed black. Hands that had rested in laps now clamped white against their knees, knuckles straining as if their bones alone held them together. Another flash. Their faces stretched further, expressions pulled into grotesque masks of ecstasy or agony. I could not tell which. The train rattled like a cage, trying to contain them, and my heart pounded as though it were part of the strobe itself. Then came the last burst of light. Every jaw unhinged at once. Their mouths tore downward, past what bones should allow, gaping into black caverns that threatened to swallow the air itself. Rows of teeth glistened in the harsh white flare. Too many, too sharp, lining mouths that were not built for words. It should have been impossible, but in that flicker, it was real. And then the lights died. The scream that had burrowed into me cut off with surgical precision. Not faded, not softened. Cut. The sudden silence hit harder than the noise ever had, thick and smothering, collapsing over me like stone. My ears rang with absence, a vacuum that roared louder than sound. I tried to breathe, but even my own gasp felt stolen. The silence devoured everything, leaving me suspended in a void too dense to move through. My skin prickled, sweat chilling against my back as though I had been buried alive in stillness. And then, within that impossible quiet, something shifted. A voice, not loud, not whispered, a word spoken with the intimacy of lips brushing the edge of my ear. My name. The sound was precise, perfect, weighted with knowledge that should not have existed in this place. It folded the silence around it, making it clear that all of the screaming, all of the noise, had only been a curtain. Behind it, something had been waiting, and now it had finally spoken to me. The silence weighed on me until I could barely stand it. Then I saw her. Across the aisle, her head still rested against the glass, eyes closed in, perfect imitation of sleep. But her reflection was awake, wide-eyed, lips moving. My name. She mouthed it again, slower this time, so there was no mistaking the shape of it. The scream came back, sudden and violent, but it wasn't in the car. It was trapped in the glass, muffled and frantic, as if the pain itself was a wall holding it back. The reflection's mouth stretched wider, trembling with the force of the sound, and the window fogged with her breath, though her real body stayed still. I told myself not to move, not to give it power. But my hand lifted anyway. My fingers hovered inches from the cold glass, reaching as though pulled by some thread knotted through my bones. Her reflection's hand shot up to meet mine. The impact rattled the window, her palm slamming hard against the other side. Then came more. Dozens of hands rose behind her, some small, some huge, all pressed against the inside of the glass. Their palms smeared across the surface, streaking condensation into frantic lines. Mouths bloomed open in the reflection, wide and endless, each one screaming soundlessly, their agony pounding against the barrier. The windows shook under their assault, trembling like water about to burst through a dam. I stumbled back, the metal floor cold under my shoes, chest hammering. The temptation to look deeper, to see who else waited behind that thin skin of glass, gnawed at me. But I turned my head away, forcing my gaze down the aisle, refusing to meet the chaos pressed against the pane. That was when I saw the passengers nearest me. Still as statues, heads tilted just enough to reveal their lips, closed, firmly shut. Yet their faces twisted, muscles pulling at the corners of their mouths until they curved into grins too broad, too knowing. Smiles stretched in silence, patient and obscene. The screaming continued behind the glass, violent and desperate. But beside me, in the real car, the passengers grinned as if they'd been waiting for me to notice. And somehow, that smile was worse than all the voices clawing to get out. The train burst from the black with a sudden violence of light. My eyes stung, flooded by daylight that felt too clean, too sharp. And with that brightness, the sound collapsed. The scream that had filled my marrow, that had clawed at my throat and bent my bones, cut away as if it had never been. The silence that followed was not crushing anymore. It was ordinary. Around me, the passengers stirred. Heads lifted, shoulders rolled. Fingers scrolled across phones that flickered awake, faces lit with casual boredom. They blinked, yawned, stretched, the picture of commuters waking from nothing more than a long nap. Not one glance betrayed what had just happened in the dark. I sat frozen, every nerve still ringing with the memory, unable to shake the certainty that I was the only one who remembered, the only one who carried the noise with me. The car swayed gently, sunlight painting gold across the windows. But my gaze lingered on the glass. It trembled. Just faintly. So soft I could have convinced myself it was the rhythm of the train. But no, it was different. The vibration was thinner, higher, like a string still quivering after the bow had left it. The echo of voices that refused to die. I leaned closer, drawn despite the ache in my bones to see. My reflection gazed back, pale and hollow-eyed, but not quite mine. The lips moved, not with the passengers, not with a rhythm of breath, but with something else entirely. A whisper. My name. The sound was faint, softer than a sigh, but I felt it as much as heard it. Each repetition brushed against me, patient, insistent, carving itself into the air between glass and skin. My name, over and over, worn smooth like a prayer bead, passed through countless fingers. I pulled back, but the whisper followed. Lean closer. Answer. It did not demand. It waited. And that was the terror of it, that the screaming had not been the point at all. The screaming had been a prelude, a distraction. What waited now was quieter, subtler, a voice that could wait forever, repeating my name until I gave it what it wanted. Daylight meant nothing. The tunnel was still inside the glass, and it would never stop calling. The dawn light still clung to my skin when I stepped onto the platform, expecting the usual shudder of steel, the stale reek of yesterday's commuters. But when the doors sighed open and I crossed the threshold, the world changed. The train was not wood and steel. Its bones were brass. The walls turned with gears, interlocking teeth grinding slow, patient revolutions. Steam hissed through pipes that snaked along the ceiling, misting the air with a metallic tang that coated my tongue. Pistons exhaled with a rhythm of lungs, the whole car alive in a way no machine should be. I froze, gripping my ticket tighter, searching for reassurance in the thin slip of paper. But it was already crumbling in my palm, brittle as ash. The ink bled into nothing, leaving behind faint, perfect impressions of gearwork stamped into the fibers. I rubbed at it in disbelief, but the shapes only deepened, etched into the paper as though it had never carried words at all. My gaze crept to the others. Each passenger sat stiff, their spines locked ramrod straight, faces pale in the glow of the brass lamps. Their heads moved only in sudden jerks, clicking to the side, back, forward again, precise as second hands on a clock. The faintest tick-tick-tick echoed under their breath, as though some hidden mechanism turned where hearts should have been. The air was heavy with oil and smoke. The stink of machinery left too long in motion. I tried to open a window, desperate for a draft of real air, but the glass would not budge. Instead, it shuddered beneath my touch, vibrating with the rhythm of unseen cogs. The doors behind me slammed shut, their sound sharp and final. Not the clatter of steel, but the winding snap of a key turned to its limit. It echoed through the car like a clock being wound for the last time, sealing me inside with its ticking congregation. The train lurched forward, gears grinding, steam venting in sharp bursts, and my stomach twisted. I no longer rode on a machine. I rode within one. And as the passengers tilted their heads in perfect unison, their eyes never blinking, I realized the journey had already been wound too tight to stop. The ticking grew louder, sinking with a steady rattle of the wheels. Then, all at once, the passengers moved. Their chests rose together in a single inhale, the sound not of lungs, but of bellows. A mechanical wheeze shuddered through the car, air dragged in and forced out with a precision too exact to be human. The unity of it chilled me. An orchestra of breath timed perfectly to the grind of gears behind the walls. Their eyes opened wider. Not wet or soft, but shining and hard. Perfect glass marbles catching the glow of brass lamps. Light fractured in them like reflections in 100 pocket watches, but none blinked. They only stared, unseeing, forward. I shifted, trying to ground myself, my hand brushing the seat beside me. A shiver tore through me as I pulled back. The cushion rippled, a pulse beneath the fabric, and for an instant, I saw what hid underneath. Metal teeth, small and countless, chewed ceaselessly, gnashing against one another in silence. The seat was not padding. It was hunger disguised, waiting for someone to sink too deep. My stomach turned, but the horror did not end there. The conductor arrived. His boots struck the floor with heavy finality, each step followed by the hiss of steam. His face was hidden beneath a polished bronze mask, so reflective it threw back a warped image of my own terror. His jaw did not rest. It ground back and forth, metal plates gnashing against one another like millstones, chewing time itself to dust. I tried to hide the ruin of my ticket, but his gloved hand reached with mechanical grace. He stamped it, though there was nothing left to mark, the crumbling paper disintegrating further beneath the press of his seal. The sound echoed, too heavy for such a fragile act, as though he had marked not the paper, but me. Then he bent close, his voice leaking through the seams of his mask like steam escaping from broken valves. Words whispered against my ear, hot and wet, yet sharp enough to cut. "Your turn soon." The gears in the walls ground faster, and every passenger clicked their heads toward me in perfect unison, as though the words had been their cue. I shoved past the rows of rigid passengers, their glassy eyes fixed forward, their jaws twitching in tiny, measured clicks. My palms slammed against the door at the end of the car, and with a violent tug, it groaned open. I staggered into the next carriage and froze. It was the same rigid spines, the same marbled eyes, the same hiss of synchronized bellows pulling air. Every face I had just passed stared here as though I had never left them. Even the conductor stood waiting, brass mask gleaming beneath the lamps that flickered with a sickly pallor. His head tilted with the mechanical jerk of a clock hand striking the hour. I spun, panic boiling up, and tore through the next door. Again, the same car, the same passengers, the same smell of oil and brass pressing thick in my lungs. My throat closed as I staggered forward, racing door to door, but every path led back to the same carriage. It was not repetition. It was trap. The conductor stepped forward, blocking my way. His mask reflected me in grotesque distortion, stretching my features into something wound too tight. In his hand, he carried a key. Not the delicate sliver meant for clocks, but a winding rod the length of my arm, teeth sharp and ready. He held it as one might a scalpel. My chest tightened, a sudden ache that hollowed me from the inside. I clutched at my sternum, nails digging against fabric, certain something was gone. The space beneath my ribs felt wrong, empty, waiting. The ache grew heavier, not pain exactly, but a void, as though something inside me had already been stolen to make room for something else. The conductor raised the key higher, slow and deliberate. His jaw plates ground together with metallic hunger, chewing seconds into dust. The passengers shifted in unison, their heads tilting, their glass eyes catching the light. And then I heard it. Not the thud of my heartbeat, but the steady, mechanical tick of something wound too tight. Each pulse sharp and metallic, no blood behind it, no warmth. My heart's rhythm no longer matched me. It matched the gears. And with every tick, the hollow in my chest grew larger, waiting for the key to finish what had already begun. The conductor loomed closer, the hiss of his masked breath damp against my neck. The key in his hand gleamed, teeth catching the dim light as though eager. Before I could wrench away, he drove it forward, pressing the cold iron tip hard against the curve of my spine. Agony tore through me, but it was wrong. Too sharp, too alien. My scream ripped free, but it was not my voice that filled the car. A whistle shrieked from my throat, high and metallic, a sound no human lungs should ever birth. The note rang off the brass walls, echoing back until I thought it might shatter my skull. My arms jerked upward, snapping into rigid positions as if pulled by invisible strings. Fingers twitched and locked, my body twitching with the cadence of some machinery I did not control. My legs stamped once, twice, then locked into place, quivering as though waiting for command. Around me, the passengers stirred at last, not individually, as one. Their hands rose in the same instant, palms slapping together in applause. The sound was deafening, not flesh on flesh, but brass palms striking brass palms, ringing like bells in perfect rhythm. The metallic thunder rolled through the car, keeping time with a pounding whistle still shrieking from my chest. Their jaws creaked open, brass hinges whining, mouths snapping shut and yawning wide again in practiced rhythm. From their throats came a chant. the sound jagged and mechanical, syllables stripped of human warmth. Tick, tick, tick. The word broke itself into rhythm, grinding into me, filling the air with its brutal repetition. Louder and louder, until the meaning bled away, leaving only the rhythm itself, the hammering of inevitability. The walls trembled with it, gears grinding faster in the bones of the train, the whole world locking into that single cadence. I tried to scream again, to force my voice through the whistle lodged in my throat, but no words came. Only the metallic shriek, sharp and endless, joining their chant until I was part of it. Tick, tick, tick. The sound swallowed me whole until I was nothing but rhythm, nothing but gears, nothing but time wound tight, waiting to break. The conductor set the key against me once more. His gloved hand turned with a grinding patience, once, then twice. The teeth dug deeper, and I felt my heart falter, skip, stutter, and then fall into obedience. The ache I had carried in my chest dissolved like smoke, replaced with something stronger, colder. A pulse steady as machinery, precise as the swing of a pendulum. The whistle lodged in my throat quieted. My breath came smooth now, but each inhale rasped with the faint hiss of steam, each exhale puffing like a piston. I rose without command, joints moving stiff but sure, arms falling into position at my sides. My head ticked left, then right, the motion exact, a second hand marking time. Around me, the others moved with me. Spine straight, jaws grinding, every body locked into the same rhythm. We were no longer passengers. We were pieces, cogs within the train, parts of its endless circuit. The clap of their brass palms stilled, but the silence was not relief. It was order, the deep and heavy quiet of machinery in perfect sync. I looked to the window, hoping for rails, for tunnels, for any sign of escape. There were none. Beyond the glass stretched an expanse of gears larger than cities, teeth gnashing against one another in eternal labor. No horizon, no sky. Only the turning of cogs grinding forever, sparks leaping where steel met steel, an endless labyrinth of motion with no beginning and no end. The train carried us deeper, but I no longer wondered where. The answer was already inside me, wound tight and ticking. Somewhere far above, faint but certain, a clock told the hour. The sound rolled through the gears like thunder, vibrating through my chest until it resonated with the mechanical rhythm of my new heart. I opened my mouth with the rest. My jaw creaked wide, but no scream emerged. What left me instead was a single, perfect note. Clear, metallic, and absolute. A chime. It rang through the car, through the gears, through the void beyond the window, carrying the certainty of time itself. And as it echoed, I knew I would toll that note again and again, forever, until the winding key turned no more.